I'm not much of a writer, but this is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me, and I've wanted to get it off my chest beyond what my coworkers know. And yes, this is actually a true story. Obviously, a lot of the specifics have been altered for confidentiality, but the story itself is true, and one I've wanted to write for a long, long time. I am a social worker. I have been for 5 years, and I've seen a lot in my line of work, but absolutely nothing compares to this one case. In college, I got my degree in psychology and specialized in psychological trauma. I worked my way through until I was a full social worker working with kids 8 to 18. Many of my cases were not kids with trauma, but I was always assigned the most challenging cases due to my education, and psychological trauma is one of the most difficult types of mental health issues to work with effectively. I'm explaining this because despite all of my education and experience, I could never identify anything remotely connected to any sort of trauma to explain this 13-year-old boy's behavior. Background of the case. I was referred by a school counselor for general misbehavior and opposition in class. He was never violent or aggressive to staff or peers, but he constantly tested boundaries and made people uncomfortable. He had constantly shifting friends, and often his former friends reported he was very charming at first, but would eventually become more and more uncomfortable and manipulative. By the time he was referred, he was a bit of a loner and had only one identifiable friend. His school counselor suspected abuse at home because this type of behavior is very typical for traumatized and abused kids. This is why I was assigned. The first day of the case, I called the family beforehand, as I always do, and complete a general safety assessment to understand any potential risks I'm walking into. As you can imagine, going into households is always a risk in this line of work. The family seemed very normal over the phone. No weapons in the house, a safe neighborhood. Family were courteous and polite. All very good signs. I submitted my assessment practically blank due to how normal they seemed. Their house was impressive. Not a mansion, but definitely upper middle class. Father was a lawyer and worked out of a home office, and thankfully had plenty of time for his family. Mom was unemployed at the time, but was a former educational specialist before staying at home full-time. Both parents were very supportive, very open, and easy to work with. Trust me, you have no idea how difficult most parents can be. At first, I met my client's two younger siblings. Let's call them Mark and James. Both of them were very bright for their age and easy to talk to. They didn't seem to have anything notably wrong with them. However, I had just some general feeling that there was something they weren't telling me, something that they were hiding from even their parents. It's something I honestly believe the parents didn't notice. But after my years of experience, it was a gut reaction I felt. Lastly, I met him, my client. Let's call him Chris. Chris was noticeably different from the family. He didn't smile when I first met him. He was pleasant enough to talk to, but he just felt off. Like the type of feeling you get when you meet someone and just feel uncomfortable, but can't pinpoint a reason. After talking to all of them, it was clear that there was no significant source of serious stress or trauma in the family. Positive community supports, attentive parents, lovely family, stable income, everything a family could want. His parents did not see any serious trouble with Chris. They said he had some executive functioning problems. Got frustrated quickly with stuff and had typical teenager behavior by pushing boundaries and being oppositional. They were more than willing to accept help, but believed the school was overreacting. The next session I had was a one-on-one with Chris. That session will always stick out to me. It was noticeably uncomfortable. He would constantly pry for information about my personal life, which was very typical for my clients, but in this case, it just felt like it was more than curiosity. He was fishing for information, like specific information. He wanted to learn about me like he was plotting something. I'm extremely good with boundaries, so it wasn't hard to deflect his questions and catch on to his clever games. For him trying to trick me to give away more of my personal life. He got frustrated with me because he could see I wasn't someone he could play around with. I fully expected him to say he never wanted to see me again. But surprisingly, at the end of our session, he said, "I had fun today. I'm looking forward to seeing you again." Those words chilled my heart. It was just the way he said it. I can't fully explain it, but it was one of the first times in my job where I truly felt nervous. Months go by, and things start to become more clear at home. The parents confessed that things were worse than they were willing to admit. Chris totally ran the house, and they were too scared to admit to themselves they've lost control. Dad actually had been burying himself in work, locking himself in his room, and only coming out to binge on family activity when he felt comfortable. Mom was actually a nervous wreck, but was very good at hiding it. She spent the most one-on-one time with Chris in the family, and out of everyone, was the one to work with him the best. Still, you could tell it was wearing down on her. His brothers, however, they avoided him at all costs. They never said why, and always provided reasonable excuses for avoiding him, but you could tell something was wrong. Chris began to get progressively more open and honest in session, always tested my boundaries, but at least was able to explain his feelings and thoughts. As I worked more and more with him, I could tell he truly had no empathy for those around him. He wished that people would just listen to him and felt sad that no one can put up with him. But really it was because people would get driven away once he tried to control them and manipulate them into doing what he wanted. Despite being an impenetrable wall to him, Chris really liked me. Definitely saw me as a challenge, but also I became the one person who he could open up to. Because of this, I felt confident that I could make a difference with him. He listened to me, and it sounded like he took my advice to heart. Still, every session he would end it by saying in a baby voice, "Make sure you're a good boy until I see you next, okay?" I always minimized it by treating it like a joke, but still, I fully recognized it as a warning sign. Unfortunately, it was only the first warning sign. One day, we were talking about pets and animals, and the use of them as coping skills. His parents were debating getting a pet, and I thought it was a good opportunity to learn how to build coping skills with them. Chris said he really liked dogs and really wanted one. He expressed how he really craves that unconditional love, and I thought this was all great. It wasn't until I learned that his idea of unconditional love was a being that would obey him utterly. I tested this by talking to him about having a cat, a pet definitely less inclined to taking orders. His response was chilling. He said that he hated cats. They annoyed him. He said the neighbors had a cat that stayed outside and he hated it. In fact, he actually said that one day he kicked it because it was bothering him too much. I asked what happened to the cat, and he said that it thankfully ran away. I knew this was bad. Remorselessly hurting animals is a big sign of serious problems. I turned this case into a high priority case for my office afterwards, and we kept a very close eye on it. Still, despite doing this, there was something I and my whole team clearly couldn't see. We knew it was there, but we couldn't see it. Things got slowly worse at home, especially during the approaching winter. I now had a family specialist working on the case, helping with behavioral interventions, and frankly, with help just living with Chris and his ability to control the house. I still worked one-on-one with Chris. One day I came over and he was building a snow fort, a very elaborate one with multiple rooms. It was honestly impressive. He played games with his siblings and one friend, one of which was some cops and robbers game. He even made a mini prison room. I went into this prison room and I noticed bones embedded in the snow. At first I was curious, but not even shocked or worried. A lot of 13-year-olds are curious about animal bones, and it's not developmentally abnormal. Still, probably not appropriate for a jail. I asked him about it, and he said it was from a squirrel that must have died right before the winter. This is something entirely possible. They had a forest in their backyard, and it wasn't the first dead squirrel they found. I asked him to toss out the bones out of respect for his siblings playing the game, and he agreed and pulled them out. As he took them out, I saw the animal's skull. It wasn't a squirrel's skull. I confronted him and said that this wasn't a squirrel's skull. It looked like a cat's skull. His face went blank and he challenged me. He said that I didn't know what I was talking about and that it was a squirrel skull. I pressed more and he eventually cut me off and said, "I don't want to talk about this. I'm removing the bones. What more do you want from me?" I was scared. That was definitely a cat's skull, and if I had to bet, I bet I knew exactly which cat. A few months more went by and I did everything for this family. It started taking more of a toll on me now, and I didn't even realize it at first. I had nightmares, and his words would echo in my head, but I didn't want to give up. I worked on cases that would also chill your soul to hear about, yet it was this case that kept me up at night. We went through 3 different family specialists during this time, who would all leave for various reasons, but honestly, I could tell. They didn't want to work with this family anymore. They knew something else was wrong, but couldn't tell what. It scared them. I don't blame them for leaving, but I didn't give up. I wanted to find some solution for them. I wanted these nightmares to stop. But most of all, I wanted to know that missing link. What was going on that I knew was happening? Something that I couldn't figure out. Eventually, it came to light. I got a phone call at 9 p.m. one night that I'll remember for the rest of my life. "We need you to come over right now," the father said. "We discovered something." My heart went cold, and I went over immediately. The family was grim. Chris himself looked scared, and this was something I never saw before. It took a lot of prying, but the truth came to light. During bedtime, the father walked up and noticed the door cracked. He opened the door just to check in and saw something that finally solved the situation. The father walked in on Chris sexually abusing one of his younger brothers. They didn't get into specifics, and I didn't want them to. Hearing that made me feel sick. How long has this been going on? How did I not notice the signs? I've worked with dozens of sexually abused kids, and I knew the signs. Yet I completely missed this. I told him I had to step out to make a phone call, but really, it was because I was ready to throw up. I came back and checked in with both siblings. The other sibling, James, insisted he had no idea and that this wasn't happening to him, but I knew this wasn't true. Mark was quiet, mostly. It was obvious that this was something that has gone on for a long time, but he had very little to say about it. The only thing he told me was that he wanted it, that he asked Chris for this. Hearing this only made me more sick. Then there was Chris himself. This was the first time he had no excuses and no lies. He begged for forgiveness and finally fully admitted to being sick and needing help. It was obvious what my next move was. I called Child Protective Services. The next day, I was waiting to hear about how one or more of the children were removed for their own safety. Yet when I came back, I was shocked. Everyone was. They closed the case. They told me straight to my face that it was a misunderstanding and that sexual behavior between siblings at their age is not extremely uncommon and not indicative of abuse. This is true to a degree. In this case, it was crystal clear. What happened while I was gone? What did they say? I fully suspected Chris to minimize it, but in order for this worker to not open the case, they all had to minimize it. I asked the family afterwards what happened, and they told me they were just as surprised as I was. It was clear they weren't. I was worried how this would affect Chris's ego. I'm sure you can imagine that something like this would make him cocky and feel invincible. Yet it didn't. Chris was cautious and worried. He was on edge, and he knew that he screwed up. Yet I don't fully believe he saw what he did as wrong. The following months I struggled. The nightmares got worse, and I had trouble working with the family. Clinically, I should have switched with a coworker, and it was a mistake to not transfer the case. I just didn't want to give up. I needed to do something more than ever. The family was in shambles. The months following were worse than ever. Chris was actually much more behaved. He was different. More nervous and cautious, but more suspicious too. I felt like his manipulations were more subtle than ever. I felt like he was now playing the long game with his manipulations. The mom had daily breakdowns. She began to disassociate often and was noticeably a different person. The dad appeared fine, stoic almost, yet he sometimes never left his office. He would lock himself in there for days at a time. And the siblings, the poor siblings, they were more quiet than ever. Like I said, the family has never been this bad. I won't list everything, but trust me when I say I did everything I could for them. Made referrals for trauma therapists for the siblings. I looked into residential schools for Chris. I fought Child Protective Services on their decision. I even took on the role of a family support specialist because all of the others stopped working with them, something my supervisor directly told me not to do. Things were grim. I started to lose hope, but then I made a breakthrough. Chris started to open back up to me and started to vent about his feelings and worries of being alone. I took the opportunity to teach him something that may have saved the family. After the years of working with him, I knew that I couldn't teach Chris to feel empathy, but I might be able to teach him to emulate it as long as he learned that being empathetic was actually in his own best interest. It took a while, but it worked. He improved relationships with his whole family. His siblings, still traumatized, but started to feel more comfortable. He even made 2 new friends. He finally learned that all these behaviors were only hurting him, and despite not being able to fully empathize, acting that way worked out for him. I'm not sure what happiness actually feels like to Chris, but it looked like he started experiencing something that finally resembled happiness. And finally, he stopped being creepy to me after every session. Things were going up, and the nightmares stopped for me too. A few months later, the family ended up moving to an even nicer house. This house was out of my coverage area, yet I worked for the duration of my insurance authorization to help with the transition. The transition went well, and Chris was even able to attend summer camps, something the family never felt comfortable with. Unfortunately, I never got a traditional farewell session due to insurance complications. Despite that, I felt comfortable leaving on the positive note that I did. I haven't seen or heard from the family for a number of years, but definitely remembered them. The case always stuck out with me. But recently something changed. I got a text message from the mom out of the blue. All it said was, "We need help." I started to type a response trying to help them reach out for the appropriate services in their area. I could get into a lot of trouble if I directly worked with them without authorization, but I still cared. Before I finished, she typed back, "Immediately, please, I beg you, please come over right now. We need help." It was clear I needed to call them. They most likely would need to call 911 for whatever was going on. Yet when I called, the phone went straight to voicemail. I consulted with my supervisor and she agreed I should call 911. I did, and the police went over quickly due to the family's history. Hours later, the police called me and asked if I could come over to the house. Normally, I wasn't allowed to do this, but I got special permission given that the police were asking for my assistance. I drove for quite a while and I was dreading the worst, yet I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The police escorted me into the house, and I was shocked. The house was empty. Nothing was destroyed, no damage, nothing thrown around, just missing basically everything. Yet it was clear that they were just home. Food was sitting on the dinner table, and just recently went cold. It looked like they somehow stopped whatever they were doing and just loaded every important piece of belonging and left. How they did this in the hours they had was unbelievable. A month has gone by, and the police have been searching for them without luck. They have contacted me multiple times to ask if I heard any word, but I haven't. No one knows what happened to them. I've stopped hearing from the police or anyone really by now, but I still wonder what happened. I might never know what actually happened, but I'll certainly never forget this. I don't take this word lightly, but Chris was, and is, a true psychopath. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or monsters, and I don't need to. People like Chris walk among us, and most of the time, we never even know about it. My phone buzzed. A text from Eric read, "Come on, please. My treat. Royal House is like the best restaurant in the city. 4 stars or 5 stars. How many stars can a restaurant get? It has the max number of stars." I smiled, sadly. Then I sighed and typed, "I'd love to, but you know I can't." "Ma'am?" A moment later, Eric shot me an annoyed emoji, followed by, "We can ask for plastic cutlery when we're there." No, that's embarrassing. They'll have like 1,000 reflective surfaces there, Eric. Plates, wine glasses, food trays. Thank you for understanding. We can go anywhere else, though. "Ma'am?" I looked up. The handyman was standing in the hallway, waving me down. I followed him to my bathroom, but stopped at the threshold of the door when I saw the light was on inside. "You want to join me in here?" "No, thank you." He furrowed his brow but didn't press me. Okay, well, here's the deal. Mirrors built into the wall. Ain't as simple as taking down a painting, you know? "Oh? And what do you say was wrong with it exactly? Ain't like mirrors can stop working, right? Unless they're broken." "No, it's not. I mean, it works fine. I'm just trying to do some remodeling." He stared at me, eyebrow cocked, and blinked once. "Remodeling?" "Mm-hmm. And that requires you to take down your bathroom mirror." Yeah." Again, he sensed I didn't want to discuss it further and moved on. "Well, we can schedule an appointment and I can take it down for you, but it ain't going to be cheap, and I'd need written permission from the owner of the building." I gulped. Damn it. "Permission? No, he wouldn't. I mean, he might, but I pay rent here, and he said I can rearrange." "This isn't rearranging, ma'am, or remodeling. This is restructuring. We'd have to do permanent work to the wall behind the glass. Once you take down something this size, you can't just put her right back up." I stared at the thing in defeat. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really am, but I don't see how we can get this done without going through the proper channels, you know." I nodded. "Aight," he said. "Well, you got my number if the landlord says we can get started, okay?" I nodded again, holding back tears. He pushed his way past me. At the apartment door, he stopped, bag in hand, and looked over at the TV with a throw rug tossed over top. "Can I just ask, what is it about mirrors that scares you so much? Don't mean to—" "Thanks for coming by," I said, shutting the door and cutting him off. I heard a mumble, "psycho," under his breath and head off. I slumped up against the door and fell back down, grabbing my hair in fistfuls. They always ask why. They always have to know. I never should have rented this damn place. On the counter where I'd left it, my phone buzzed again. I got up and checked. 3 messages from Eric. Fine. Maybe we can do something outside. Then, would that work? Then, you there? As I read through them, a 4th popped up. "Talk to me, Anna. I'm worried about you." I typed in, "Sorry, I was talking to the maintenance guy. I'm okay." "No, I'm not." To change the subject, I quickly followed up with, "Movie in the park is tonight. Want to do that?" He gave the message a thumbs up, and I gave the same to his response. "Meet me there at 7? Then I plopped on the couch with cereal, opened my laptop, and typed in DIY remove bathroom mirror. There was a YouTube video matching that, so I clicked on it and leaned back with my breakfast. Then the screen went dark, and I saw the briefest possible reflection of myself. Shit! I panicked, spilling half my bowl onto my PJs as I slammed the screen down. Milk missed the laptop by an inch and covered the couch cushions. I didn't even bother cleaning it up. Not yet. I breathed heavily, eyes closed. Hello. Miss me? No, nope, nope. You're fine. You didn't hear that, and you barely saw anything. I got my bearings, slowed my breathing, and searched for the cause of the dead computer. Found it quickly enough. The charger wasn't plugged in. I fixed that and forced myself to think of something, anything else, while I cleaned up the milk and cereal. You didn't see it. Baseball cards. You kind of did, though, didn't you? Baseball diamonds, baseball bats. You definitely did. World Series. Who won last year? Yankees. Probably. Don't they always win? You saw your face. And it's freaking ugly. Yankees. Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth bars, candy bars. You bitch. Snickers. Milky Way. The Milky Way galaxies. Andromeda. You ugly bitch. I never watched that show or Battlestar Galactica. You know you saw me. You know you saw that zit. I wonder if there are any good sci-fi shows. Probably don't have the best budget. Star Trek was a big deal, though. Eric saw that zit, and he didn't say anything. He doesn't actually love you. Star Trek, Star Wars, Yoda, speaking backwards. Always thought that was funny. Eric hates you. He mocks you. He screws other women. Luke Skywalker, skies, big beautiful skies. Probably Beth or Melissa. He always thought they were cuter than you because they are. He doesn't love you. Beautiful skies. Ugly you. He's using you to get to them. Before I even knew what was happening, I had my laptop back open. I couldn't resist. I looked at my reflection again. There was a zit. Huge. Ugly. Pulsating. Then the device booted back up, and the image was gone. I felt my face, but couldn't feel anything there. No blemish. No zit. It's there. The voice in my head. Your mind is lying to you, Anna. But I am not. It's there. I stood at the threshold of the bathroom for a very long time before I walked inside, and I stood in front of the mirror even longer before turning the lights on. But I couldn't only look at my reflection for a split second once the room was lit. I gasped and buried my face in my hands. Look at me. No, I don't look like that. I can't. You do. I peeked back out from between my fingers. There it was. Left cheek. How had I not seen it before? How long had I been walking around like that? I felt my face. Something that big, that infected looking. It'd have to have hurt, right? But I felt nothing. My face was smooth. Don't trust your mind. Trust me. I walked up to the mirror, leaned in. The thing was red, bright red, like an insect bite but worse. Festering, moving, utterly disgusting. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed some lemon juice, applied it to a cotton swab, and held that to my face for some time, while I tried and failed to distract myself with some trashy TV. But when I got back to the bathroom, I was horrified at the result. The zit looked bigger somehow. What? How? I squeezed the skin of my cheek. In the mirror, the blemish oozed with pus and slime. You deceased bitch. Look at you. You think Eric wants to see you like this? I stopped, looked up a bit. And what's that? A unibrow? Have you no pride in your appearance? I felt the space between my eyebrows. It felt smooth, but the image didn't lie. Maybe it had been a while since I'd plucked. See? I show you who you truly are. I blinked away tears and scrambled through my drawers, tossing floss and tampons and cotton swabs and bandages to the floor. I couldn't find any tweezers. Disorganized bitch. I screamed and ran back to my room, the place with no mirrors and the curtains always drawn closed, and fumbled around the drawers there. I did the same, tossed pens, notebooks, pills, my old diaries. buried at the bottom in dust. Got him. I grabbed the tweezers and ran back into the bathroom, but I stopped cold again before I even started plucking. Yes, your nose has always been that crooked, bent, hooked, like a witch. I got in close, moved the tip up and down and around. Want to know why you're never noticed? Because you're as stupid as you are ugly, and without me you'd have never known. I felt something wet fall down my face and wiped it. Tears. I hadn't noticed them either. Pathetic. The TV was on, but I was too distracted to my phone to pay any attention. Rhinoplasty options, prices, local doctors, free consulting. Did I really want to get a nose job from a place that offers free consulting? Could I afford not to? On the TV, swimsuit models pranced around behind some before and after shots of a woman who lost 73 pounds on a new diet supplement. Another man had lost 41 pounds and looked great. God, they're beautiful. Look at them. Chiseled, happy, perfect. I looked down. I didn't look fat, but come back to me. I'll show you who you are. I turned sideways in the bathroom, checked out my profile. It was a wonder my shirt didn't burst open with how hard it was straining against my own belly. When did I get so fat? You cow. You fat cow. I looked down. My shirt was baggy. My stomach was flat when I ran my hand down it. No, don't go there. Don't you dare. This is how you got fat in the first place. You trick yourself into thinking you're not. Then you go for another drink, a second slice, another piece of candy from the bowl. Look at you. I did. The image was clear. I'd gained at least 40 or 50 pounds, maybe more. I teared up. You knew you shouldn't have had the ice cream last week, but you did it anyway, you fat bitch. I shut the lights off, stared at my obese silhouette in the dark, and sobbed silently. In the kitchen, I cut a single piece of celery into 4 parts and ate one. When I finished puking it up, I tossed the rest and glanced at the fridge. Empty it. I did. I grabbed trash bags from beneath the sink, opened the fridge, got on my knees, scoured around the shelves. I picked up a block of cheese, turned it over in my hand. Trash it. Shredded, cheddar, that old Swiss. All of it. Probably moldy anyway. I tossed it all into a bag, leaned back into the fridge. Milk. What do you need milk for? Coffee, cereal, things that make you fat. Into the bag it went. Apples. Fruits fattening, they say. Stick with veggies, maybe not even that. I tossed my apples, the half-empty bag of grapes, the avocados. After a moment's hesitation, I tossed the carrots too. Trash, trash. Like you. Creamer, ditch it. Orange juice, pathetic. Out. Leftover takeout. Amazed you didn't eat it all at once. Gone. I tossed every fattening, disgusting thing in that fridge until it was empty. Cabinets. I threw them open, trash bag in hand. Spaghetti? Do you enjoy buying new and bigger pants every month? Trash it. Eating makes you fat. Soup too. Out. I scrolled through old photos in bed. They're all perfect. Beth, Melissa, Addie, Becca. But not you. Look how ugly you look. Hooked nose, unibrow, yellow, crooked teeth. That big, fat gut. That's why you're off to the side. They didn't want you there at all, but they're too nice to say anything. I commented below one of the Facebook photos. Delete this, please. A moment later, Beth wrote back. What? Why? You okay? No, I'm not. She would have known that if she cared at all. I didn't respond to her comment, or the message I got from her a moment later. Hey, you okay? We miss you. Liar, liar, why would anyone miss you? I know. I alone tell the truth. I know. I typed out and deleted 3 or 4 different responses before giving up. A moment later, my phone buzzed. I wiped my tears, checked it. Eric, of course. Wow. That sucks. I was really looking forward to seeing you tonight. You sure? I didn't even respond. I just rolled over and wept until I fell asleep. If they can't tell you the truth, are they really your friends? Be alone with me here in the deep. The knife dug deeper. The wound bled freely, just like the other cuts and scrapes that covered my face and arms. You deserve the pain. Dig harder. I did. But in the mirror, the zit, now one of dozens, went nowhere. I ran my hand over my face. I still couldn't feel the pimple there. I could feel those cuts and see them too. Hideous. A patchwork of self-inflicted scars that wouldn't go away quickly. Worthless whore. You've made it worse. Have you ever done anything else? Foundation, concealer, lots and lots of that. Lipstick, mascara, eyeshadow, primer, powder. I'd bought most of it last week. It was almost all gone now, caked in overlapping layers on my face. I checked the mirror. It barely worked. The zit still visible. Hell, unibrow? Too ugly to cover up. No matter how hard I tried, or how frequently I plucked. And I can't fix that nose with makeup, or my teeth, or my frizzled hair, or how one eye is lower than the other, or how my cheeks are somehow too gaunt and too fat at the same time. I smeared that shit all over anyway. Obsessively. It mixed together, formed layers, crusted over. More, never enough. Just like you. I tossed another empty pen on top of ripped out photos of myself that laid all over the bedroom floor. I uncapped another ballpoint and scribbled over a yearbook photo, already smeared with the word ugly and an arrow pointing to my face. You've always been this hideous. Unworthy. I tossed the photo. Not enough. Stomp on it. I did. Rip it. It represents you. It is you. Tear it. I did that too. Over and over until the biggest piece of it was hardly a centimeter wide. Screaming. Teeth grit. Crying with rage and vicious hatred. I kicked the pile of torn photos, but smacked my toe against something solid and screamed. When I plopped back down on the bed, I picked it up. It was my old diary. I opened it, flipped through. Drawings, scribbled notes, written by me as a child, then as a teen. Shut that. Focus. In one drawing, a demonic beast stared back at normal little me from the other side of the mirror. Wait. Listen to me. Not that, you fat whore. I kept reading. Don't listen to the mirror monster, read one entry. No, it's not you. 14-year-old me had written on another page. It's something else. Something evil. Can I be evil if I speak the truth? It lies. No. The mirror doesn't lie. I don't lie. Your friends do. You do. To yourself. You're reading lies now. The imposter distorts your reflection. It isn't you. Does it? Do I? Come to me again, Anna. See what you are. Through my eyes. Or are you afraid? Shut up. What did you say to me? Shut up. I beat you once. You didn't beat me. I flipped to another page in the diary. No mirrors, no monster. I'd written over and over. No mirrors, no monster. No mirrors, no monster. I'd broken or covered every mirror, avoided them ever since. See, you ran from me, from the truth. Coward. You can't confront it, because I'm right about you. You know I am. Stop it. You are mine. Mine. Stop it. I screamed aloud. In my head, something cackled. No mirrors, no monsters. No mirrors, no monster. No mirrors, no monster. No mirrors, no monster. With resolve, I went into the living room and hurled my laptop into the TV. Both shattered. The TV fell over and slipped behind its stand with a crunch. Missed me. I grabbed a screwdriver from the drawer and undid the brass doorknob. In it, my demonic reflection, the imposter, mocked me, sticking out its tongue, pulling at its face. It wasn't my reflection at all. I wasn't doing those things. I saw it mouth the word harlot and heard the scream in my head. When they were loose enough, the knobs clattered to the floor. The door creaked open. I stood up, grabbed a book, went to the bathroom, hit the lights. In the mirror, the imposter mocked me, did things I wasn't doing. It pretended to smear makeup on its face, like I'd done. I felt a powerful urge to do the same, but resisted. Then it pretended to gouge zits to purge food. Suddenly I wanted more than anything to do both. But I didn't. I lifted the book. It stopped trying to puppet me and instead stared me down, the embodiment of all my insecurities. Its eyes were wild and wicked and full of hate. What are you? Do it, it mouthed. As usual, I heard it in my head. All at once I realized it sounded nothing like me at all, like my own thoughts. Show your mettle. I screamed and hurled a book into the glass. Slam. It chipped. I picked the book up and did it again. Crack. The chip spidered. The imposter grinned. In the broken glass, it looked even more distorted, more evil. Suddenly, it threw itself forward and pounded its fist on the other side of the glass, mocking my attempts to break it. I stumbled back, startled. Then it barked at me like a dog, over and over. I was paralyzed with fear. I shut my eyes. No mirrors, no monster. No mirrors, no monster. No mirrors, no monster. I hurled the book again and again. Smash, crack, slam. The mirror splintered, cracked, then shattered into a million shards. The reflection was gone. Am I? It cackled again. I collapsed, weeping. All my resolve, my determination, and I just... You are mine. Didn't. Mine. Have it. Stop it. Please. No. I broke you. I broke you. I cried. I had no answer. I was so weak, so tired. Outside, the door creaked open. Hello? It was Eric. I perked up and opened my mouth to speak, to call out, but I couldn't. I looked down at the broken shard of glass. The imposter had covered its mouth. I couldn't scream. I heard Eric stop short. He must have seen the TV smashed and the bags of food still by the fridge. Oh my God, he said. Anna! Anna! He began running around the place looking for me. Anna! Look at me, said the imposter. You want him to see you like this? I picked up the shard of glass. The imposter stared back, a vicious, mutated mockery of my image. It raised its wrist, pretended to slash it. Suddenly I felt cold and dead inside, utterly without hope. Do it, it mouthed. Pay for your worthlessness in blood. It mimed another slash, right across the wrist. I wanted to obey. Anna! I heard Eric barge into my room. Where are you? I didn't even notice it, but I'd already extended my other wrist. How did you... Remember to whom it is you belong. Obey. Obey. I raised the shard to my wrist, pressed the tip of the glass into my skin until it drew blood. I deserve this. Do it. End it. End me. Silence me. Silence it all. I shut my eyes. It was all I wanted. Anna. I opened them, looked up. Eric was standing in the bathroom door, and suddenly I wanted to end it all just a little bit less. "Oh my God," he said. "Your mom told me to check in on you. Oh my God. Oh God." He didn't even ask about the mess, or the shard at my wrist, or my cuts and scrapes and bruises. He just got down and hugged me and kissed my forehead. I dropped the glass. "No, focus." "I thought you were dead," said Eric. He sounded genuinely relieved. For some reason that surprised me. He leaned back, looked at the mess, looked at me. "Let's get you cleaned up, okay? Come on." I didn't want to move. I just hugged him and cried. "Hey," he said. "It's okay. You're okay. Come here." He started crying too, just a bit. "Stop this." "No. Obey me." I choose not to. "You unworthy bitch. Slut. His love is false." "No. You are." "Don't you defy me. You hear me? Whore, heartlet, worthless." "Enough." Eric squeezed me tighter. I did the same back. I heard a whisper in my head, then silence. My phone buzzed. It was Eric. I picked it up. "Hey, you ready?" Yeah, sorry. I'm doing my makeup. I'll be right out." "Okay, I'm outside. Gotta get back in 15. "I know, I'm coming. Love you." "You too." I hung up and resumed applying my makeup, normal amounts of it, in the fixed bathroom mirror on the wall. "Look at me." "I'm busy. I have to do my makeup." "Look at me. I'm you." "Nah, you're not." In the mirror, the imposter spat at me, stuck out its tongue, pulled at its face, mimed suicide. Utterly desperate and just as powerless, because that's how I wanted it. I capped the lipstick. "Damn, I look good," I said out loud. Then I hit the lights, left the bathroom, past the new TV and the fridge stocked with leftovers, and ran outside into the sun. I liked games as a kid. Not sports or anything. I hated going outside. Hell, I still do. I preferred staying indoors, watching TV and drawing, but most of all, I loved games. Remember those sleepover games? That was it. Bloody Mary, Three Kings, Charlie Charlie. I was obsessed. I invited friends over all the time to play with. Everyone I knew had chickened out at least once, but not me. Nothing was too scary for me. I never screamed when Ouija boards answered. I didn't flinch during concentrate. I was the bravest one. I tried to get scared. One night, it worked. Someone else found the game this time. For the sake of anonymity, I'll call her Anne. I was at her house celebrating her birthday with some friends. I was in her basement, sitting on a bedroll. My friends were scattered around the room. We talked, we laughed, we ate junk food. Looking back, I feel regret. That was the last time I'd be happy. At about 11, the birthday girl came downstairs. She carried a bag of chips. Her eyes were sparkling with a look I knew well. She had a game to play. I sat up on the mattress and scurried down the stairs and sat on a blanket. She bit down on a smile, and I felt a thrill of anticipation. The other girls quieted. It was time for our favorite part of the night. Have you guys ever played The Witch and the Maid? I snorted. What kind of a name is that? Seriously, it's really cool. Anne put down the bag of chips. We should play it. All right, so how do we play? Another girl asked. Anne smiled, loving the attention. I don't blame her. I'd been in her shoes more than once. She closed her eyes. After a dramatic pause, Annie pointed to me with a shaking finger. You, she whispered. I rolled my eyes, but I came over and sat down. Anne pulled my head down to her lap. Oh? I looked up at her and grinned. Wow, Anne, I didn't know you felt that way. Oh my God, stop, Anne groaned, but she was smiling. You're killing the mood. I settled my head back down. Whatever you say. All right. Anne's legs moved as she cleared her throat. Here's how we play. The game requires a minimum of 2 people. It's preferable that they're women, but it works for others as well. One, the witch, covers the maid's ears. The witch then has to say their biggest secret out loud. Obviously, the maid wouldn't normally hear it. However, the game lets them hear certain syllables. Those syllables form part of a demon's name. I yawned, cutting Anne off. And then we die, right? Not exactly, she said. It's a time limit on when you die. I raised my eyebrows. This was new. The more of the name you hear, the less time you have. Anne shifted her legs, getting more comfortable. For example, 1 syllable is 1,000,000 steps. I craned my neck to look up at her. And the whole name? Anne giggled. Then you just die on the spot. Oh, okay. Sounds fun. I settled my head onto her lap. Let's go. I could almost feel Anne's eyes roll. Well, geez, fine. Her hands went over my ears. At first, there was nothing, just indistinct mumbling. I was about to call bullshit. Ta. I almost sat up. What the what? It was as clear as if she'd spoken in my ear. I looked up, suspecting a trick. All I saw was Anne's chin moving. I settled back down. Her hand must have slipped. Wah. Okay. So it did work. I didn't move anymore. I was satisfied that some kind of weird science was in this. There always was. Hallucination and Bloody Mary, wind and Charlie Charlie. It was simple. I relaxed, waiting for the next syllables. Ki, sa, die. And then her hands were off of my ears. I sat up. Anne watched me eagerly. Well? She asked. I shrugged. 5, I guess. I stretched my neck. How much time, doctor? Anne sighed. Not time, steps. Anyways, she thought for a second. You have 20 steps. I put my hand to my chest in mock horror. Oh no, looks like I need a wheelchair. Ah, shut up, Anne snorted. Anyway, who's next? Everyone was eager to participate. Respectively, they got 50, 80, and 20. The last one gave me a fist bump over having the same number. Then it was Anne's turn. Okay, I gotta try this, I said, patting my lap. Come here. Anne groaned. I don't want to get up. You're not the one with 20 steps left, I mocked. Anne laughed and came over. Once we were all settled, I covered her ears. Right. A secret. Well, when I was 8, I wanted a cookie, I started. The girls laughed. They were on a shelf, so That made me stop. When I'd said ta, it hadn't sounded like me. I looked up. Nobody seemed to have noticed. I swallowed, but kept going. I tackled the shelf, which, wasn't a good idea. It fell and it nearly killed me. I stopped again. The girls watched me. Go on, one said. Ah, right, I said. I started crying and said, Mom, help me, I'm gonna die. I took a second to clear my throat. I had reached the limit of my syllables. She came running, and I was so scared because I thought she'd kill me. I winced. I was hitting a lot of syllables. So, I pretended to be dead, and when she saw me, the girls started laughing. Oh no, you poor baby, one said. I smiled weakly, taking my hands from her ears. She grinned. Wow, 10 syllables, she counted, then threw her hands up. Whoop, I'm gonna die. The other girls immediately clamored. Wait, how many steps? I asked. Dread was growing in my stomach. I'd guessed the number of syllables correctly. 5. If I have to pee, I'm doomed. Anne laughed. I went white. Anne, I don't think... Her face lit up. Oh, am I gonna die? She stood up and dramatically took a step. Look, I'm throwing my life away. She took 3 more steps. I grabbed her leg. Anne, stop it, I pleaded. I'd never been that scared. This isn't fun anymore. She kicked my hand, laughing. Not for you, maybe. She pivoted 1 foot, lift the other. Step. Blood spewed from her mouth. Within seconds, we were all covered. It was still warm, metallic, red. Someone screamed. We were all marked for death. The girl I'd fist bumped earlier, the one with 20, used her steps running upstairs for help. Her blood poured back down like a river. The one with 50 made it upstairs, but she only managed to scare Anne's mother before her steps were up. That poor woman got covered. 80 was smarter. She saved her steps for the walk to the cop car. Sadly, she didn't make it much farther than that. Me? The cops found me crying downstairs, covered in blood and refusing to walk. I had to be carried to the cruiser. As a matter of fact, I had to be carried everywhere. The baffled doctors put it down to shock. They explained the others' deaths as sudden illnesses. I didn't tell them the truth. Now, I really do have a wheelchair. 20 years have passed. In that time, I've taken 18 accidental steps. I've spent the rest scrupulously avoiding walking. Over time, I've gotten used to it. Still, there's one thing I can't adjust to. I can't accept the fear. I don't want to live like this anymore. Consider this a suicide note. I don't have anyone to miss me, so all should be well. I just hope my legs can still support me. Still, before I go, you have to promise me something. Count your steps. I live by myself on the first floor of a very cheap apartment. It was right around my budget for an inconspicuous crap hole that no one wanted to live in. A lot of bad reps surrounded the place, apparently. So badly that this fun little flat of 3 rooms had been marked down to as low as $500, which was a steal for me. I wasn't exactly wealthy, and I always had a limited budget on what money I could spend, since the money that gets sent to me from my relatives is pretty sparse, but they try their best. So it had always been a peaceful living for me. I didn't mind the unexpected visitors or the weird noises from its bad maintenance. The neighbors did not once ever know my name. Neither did anyone around know my name, and that was fine. And I rarely ever attract people at high school, save for the occasional passing comment on my appearance, though I didn't care that much. Though one day, I came home from school to a very odd sight. A gift basket right at my doorstep with items like wine, nuts, butter, milk, and many more scrumptious items. Taped to its handle was a white envelope with a red wax seal. I looked around before taking the gift basket and entering in. I first opened the letter, which read, "If you're reading this, Leah, I know what you are. Here's my offering to you. Kill these people for me." Below was a list of names of people that I somewhat knew. Ricky Fitzgerald, Ryan Yang, Tyler Lewis, Sophie McGilvery. I was curious as to how this person knew my name or where I lived, but I just decided to ignore it. I tossed it aside and went about my day. I did my homework, ate dinner, then went straight to bed. Though throughout the entire time, I felt eyes boring into the back of my head, as if somewhere, someone was watching me the entire time. I ignored this feeling and went to bed. I woke up, showered, cooked myself some breakfast, and walked out the door to find that there was another gift basket at my doorstep. I took it back inside again to read the letter attached. "You don't understand. I know what you can do. Please kill these people, or I will tell." I didn't understand yet again. The previous one sounded like a threat, but this one sounded more like begging. I initially thought I could handle a threat or blackmail, but one that seemed desperate caught me off guard. I thought I would investigate further and see who this mystery person was. I knew the person knew where I lived and how to get to me when I was not in the house. And it is safe to assume that they are stalking me to some degree. I leave the gift basket inside and head to school. I begun my sweep for individuals that could be the ones sending me these unsettling messages. My first thought was on the loudest guy in our class. I'll just call him Billy. Billy was the captain of the football team, a very charismatic guy, and has had more dates than a calendar. He's had his eye on me for a month, but I never really showed interest. Neither did I lead him on. Problem is that he's a rather good person, and he'd never resort to that sort of coercion, let alone ask me to kill people. Not to mention his extracurricular activities and dates demanded his attention for most of his days. So he likely wasn't free to even drop that off to my doorstep. Second thought shifted to the calmer one on the other side of the class, reading through a list of notes and giving free lessons to our unprepared classmates. Let's call him Jason. He was smart, both on the books and on the streets. He was my lab partner, and we paired up often for our projects. He likely has deduced the path I'd take going home, and I've seen him in my neighborhood a few times. Only reason he isn't a prime suspect is the same as Billy, since they're both held back by their activities, and we've kept our relationship mostly professional. And then there was the last kid, Ricky. If someone could stink of their sins, Ricky would stink of nepotism and perversion. His parents were pretty wealthy and had some degree of control over the school due to being patrons, so he gets big in the head and thinks he can get away with anything. And unfortunately, he has. 5 harassment cases that resulted in those poor girls moving away. I nearly was at the receiving end of his terror, but pulled all the stops to make sure he couldn't manipulate me. I was his worst enemy, and the one he could not control. Still, a threat would explain everything, but asking me to kill someone was too complicated, and he certainly would not send me a gift basket with a letter, not to mention that his name was on the list, so he would not be doing himself any favors. And it did not necessarily narrow down who the perpetrator was. I decided to forego thinking about it. I went through the day doing my business before returning to the thought back in recess, before I felt my shoulder get bumped by someone. I knew who it was as I scowled. It was that piece of crap Ricky. "Did I do that?" he said in a mock tone. "Being blissfully unaware that your fat ass occupies nearly every available space?" I replied with much snark. "Watch your tone." He always resorted to this whenever he'd been verbally outplayed, which honestly wasn't hard. Or what? I dared him to expose whatever he threatened those poor girls with. Red-faced with anger, he quickly turns to eat by himself. I heard the girls gossiping behind me about him. I could pick out a few key information from their talk. That creep Ricky's at it again. I heard from Sophie that he got another one. Is that why she skipped class yesterday? She seems to be skipping today as well. That was it. That was the final piece I needed. I knew what I needed to do now. I let the day roll by as usual, and then walked home. I found another gift basket at my door, this time with an alarmingly high amount of cash in it, about $1,000 worth, alongside some unsettlingly expensive items like jewelry, watches, and the like. The letter was there again, this time sounding even more desperate. "Time is running out. Please do as I ask. Please." This time, I needed to know who it was. If this gift giving was going to follow the same routine, then I should be able to catch the perpetrator. I decided to brew coffee for myself and wait the night out, instead of going to sleep. I sat in front of the doorway, occasionally checking the peephole to see if someone was there. I did this every 15 minutes or so. At about 5:30 a.m., I checked to see a shadow cast in my hallway as it approached my door. A figure wearing a black hoodie and carrying a basket. I found my suspect. As soon as they stopped outside the door, I burst open with a knife, shouting, "Aha!" The figure screamed as she nearly fell backwards, dropping the gift basket. I quickly took it and found nothing in it, except a knife and the letter. While the perpetrator was getting their bearings, I opened the letter and read it. Please, I'm begging you. I have nothing else left to give. I'll give you my life if you want so. I raised an eyebrow at this as I looked at the mysterious figure remove her hood, revealing a pretty blonde girl with blue eyes. My suspicions were correct. It was Maria. Maria is a fairly popular student in our school. Good grades, good looks, and fun personality. She'd been skipping class for the past few days, calling in sick. But the day she called in sick was also the day I started receiving these strange packages from her. But heavens know why she's giving me gift baskets and these weird letters. She looked very close to crying as I sighed and helped her up, opening the door for her. Come inside and explain everything. I brewed Maria some coffee, and I let her gather everything together as I patiently waited for her to get herself together. Are you okay? I asked. I'm fine. I just need to recall things. Maria replied as she sniffled, prompting me to hand her a handkerchief to wipe her tears and nose with. Thanks. So let me just start this simply. Why were you sending me these gifts? To kill people I wanted dead, Maria replied, as if the question had an obvious answer. Okay, follow-up question. Why do you want them dead? I asked, to which Maria looked hesitant to explain. It's a long story, Maria replied, before I poured her a cup and smiled. I've got time. When she explained everything, it all began to fall into place. Maria was another target of Ricky's horrid harassment schemes. When she had been caught alone with him, she tried to scream for help. Ryan Yang, our homeroom teacher, witnessed it but did nothing about it. Maria barely escaped with her dignity intact from Ricky's molesting. She tried to open up about it to a few people. Sophie McGilvery was one of them. Sophie had unfortunately made fun of her and called her Ricky's slut. And Tyler only saw fit to profit from this, blackmailing Maria to pay him a certain amount, or else he'd spread rumors about her. A young girl could only take so much abuse and mistreatment, so she resorted to desperate measures. But that only left one question. Why me then? I asked, though Maria looked too hesitant to explain. I saw you. When I was walking home by your house, I saw through your window a burglar breaking in through your window. I was about to call the police when a tentacle held him and tossed him out. It terrified me. It terrified me. Then I saw you look out with satisfaction, then went back inside, Maria said before bringing out some books on the table. After what happened with Ricky and those monsters, I got desperate. I saw you as my ticket out of this, so I researched everything about what you could be, and I've come to the conclusion that you were an eldritch abomination that assumed human form. That's why I've been giving you the gifts. They were offerings. Well, why, Maria? That's insane, I quickly retorted as I looked at the books, all by Lovecraft. I got desperate, okay? Maybe I was just seeing things and being a stupid, desperate bitch, Maria screamed back at me before breaking down again. I looked at her with pity, moving towards her side and giving her a hug, and letting her release her anguish. I got so overwhelmed. I didn't tell my parents. I decided to steal all those things. Shh. I shushed gently, placing a finger on her lips. I then gave her another comforting hug. It's okay. I'm not going to judge, but trust me. Things will get better. But... Maria tried to retort as I gently guided her to my bedroom. You need to sleep and rest, I softly said as I delicately pushed her to make her lie down. I promise you, things will be okay. They might not be now, but they will be. But how do you know? Maria asked timidly, tucking herself in as she didn't let go of my hand. Trust me. I smiled as I watched her close her eyes, as I saw the yellow sky rise out my window. After a few days, the problem seemed to resolve itself. Ricky had finally been exposed and arrested, but died in police custody. Mr. Yang's house and property burned down due to an unidentified arsonist. Someone had apparently seen the person on his property, but did not inform the authorities right away. Sophie apparently had some sex tapes on her computer because she had spread like wildfire on the internet. Never heard from her again. And Tyler got injured by a mugger on his way home. Maria believes it was all me. I just shrug at it. Maria still gives gifts every now and then, but instead of leaving them at my doorstep, she likes to invite herself in for a chat over some food and such. And the letters, thankfully, weren't desperate begging or another hit list, but just the sweetest words that I can receive. It's become a bit of a regular thing lately, and strangely, I like her company. Blasphemous coming from the girl who tried her best to keep to herself, I know. And well, that leads to today. Of course, all that meeting and chatting was bound to lead someplace, so of course we ended up being an item. As soon as we got into college, we moved together into a nicer apartment, and we'd been having a blast together since then. It'd been a running joke between the two of us that she is my worshiper and that I am her goddess. She still calls her gifts to me her offerings every now and then, which just makes me blush a little. Whenever we go to sleep together, she clings to me, a force of habit since the first day I lulled her to sleep, but I'm more than happy to let her do so. I like to think back to the day that she told me what she thought I was. I grin a little thinking about it, since I technically never denied the allegation, and I think she knows it too. I gave my sleeping worshiper a peck on a cheek before I snuck a tentacle up the wall to turn off the lights. She's a keeper. That's what my dad always used to say, with a chuckle and a pat to my head. She's a keeper, he'd say to a grocer or clerk at a convenience store. People used to fawn over the cute pigtailed gal by her daddy's side. Always said her pleases and thank yous. Never threw a tantrum. Was an absolute angel. Maybe this is why when I grew up, I always need someone giving me a pat on the back. If I'm not getting a compliment about how I look or how well I did at work, I'm going to assume I did something wrong, or I had a piece of lettuce stuck in my teeth all day. This hasn't always worked out for me. I'm a keeper, but I can also be a sucker, like what's been happening with my boss. I love working as a secretary. It's a job that makes me feel really fulfilled. This makes me a bit of a stereotype, though, with how I practically melted when Jonathan Price, my boss, complimented my blouse and my work ethic on my first day. I just reminded myself by looking at the silver ring on his left hand and the picture on his desk with his children that I shouldn't read too much into it. Jonathan was perfect, though, and over time I realized I read him just right. I never wanted to be the other woman. I just wanted to be loved. And being around Jonathan, working late nights just to have a moment to talk with him, having drinks after work, the inevitable happened. He kissed me after a few too many beers, and we ended up going back to my place. We slept together. I poured my heart out to him after that, how I'd liked him for so long and that I really felt a connection with him. He just smiled and brushed the hair from my eyes, telling me that I was the kind of girl you didn't just let get away. Of course, I believed him. Of course, I swallowed the lump in my throat whenever I saw Mariana coming to visit her husband, my lover. Of course, I listened when Jonathan said he was going to leave her soon, but just needed to make sure he didn't hurt her. And of course, whenever he called me to meet him at our typical meeting spot, a hotel in downtown, I was there with bells on. Yeah, I know what you're thinking of me. I think it too. I'm not the brightest bulb in the package, but like I told you, I'm pretty easily manipulated. But I love Jonathan. I love his work ethic. I love how he takes care of his kids. Kids that he learned soon enough I couldn't have. I wonder if that was part of my appeal to him, that he couldn't accidentally knock me up. He didn't love me. I was just an easy lay, a stereotype in every sense of the word. I only started wising up last week when it occurred to me that Jonathan really wasn't slowing down his relationship with his wife and certainly wasn't preparing for divorce proceedings. She was pregnant with their third child. I saw the pictures he posted on Facebook of their anniversary dinner. It hit me like a semi-truck when I read his status about enjoying their 15 years together and couldn't wait to see what the next 15 will bring. I cried, I drank a lot of wine, and then I asked him to come to my apartment, that we needed to talk. Scary words for a guy, right? Took Jonathan a while to drag his ass over, which by then I was even more drunk. I don't drink often, and certainly not in excess, but can you blame me? I just had that reality-shattering realization. I was just his pet to call on whenever he wanted to screw around and spew nonsense words at. Nonsense words I fell for. Well, I did what I should have done about 6 months ago. I called him out on his bullshit. Said that he was never going to leave his wife, but he wasn't going to stop keeping me as his side piece. He tried to calm me down, but I wasn't going to back down to his pretty words this time. Either pick me or stay with your wife, else I'll call her and let her know the truth. My ultimatum I'd spent the previous hour preparing. I felt super proud of it when I spat it out, expecting him to pick at least one of the options so this nonsense could end. Jonathan's face went white, then red, and then he picked a third option. He killed me. Jonathan picked up the empty wine bottle. He muttered something about me being too much trouble, and then he brought it down right on the top of my head, caved my skull in on the first smash, sending shards of glass all over my living room. I dropped like a rock, but I guess Jonathan was just too pissed off because he used the remains of the bottle in his hand to keep stabbing me again and again in the throat and neck. I was about decapitated by the time he came to his senses. Of course, Jonathan freaked out, panicked, just washed the blood off his hands and wiped down the bottle before escaping the apartment. Left me there, all alone, head nearly off my shoulders. My living room, a mess of blood, wine, and glass. Man, you should have seen the look on his face when I came into work today. I was at my desk by the time he came in. He looked like hell, understandably. He just killed a woman 2 days before. But he froze in his steps when he saw me sitting at my desk, tip-tapping away on my keyboard while scheduling another appointment later that week. I just waved to him real quick before going back to work. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jonathan bolt for his office and slam the door. Oh, that felt so good. Watching him be the one to run in fear. Was he doubting his memory? Was he trying to convince himself that he'd just had a really bad dream? I clocked out after that, complaining about a cold. It'd been passed all around the office, but I didn't go to my home. I went to Jonathan's home, a nice house in a nice part of town. I saw his wife working in the small garden out front, and after adjusting my scarf, I got out and walked up the drive. She didn't see me until I was right behind her. Mariana was a pretty woman. Even right now, with a smudge of dirt across her face, no makeup, and her auburn hair held back with a yellow bandana, I cleared my throat, and she nearly dropped the flower bulb she had in her hands. She glanced up, immediately recognizing me. "Oh, hi, Nicole. Is something wrong?" She got up, brushing off her hands and smiling from ear to ear. Her pregnancy was just starting to show, her belly just so slightly growing. "Can we talk inside?" "Oh, sure, sweetheart. The kids are at school, won't be back for a few more hours. Are you all right? Your voice sounds a bit raspy." "I'll be fine." I waited until she was sitting before I began the most difficult conversation of my life, and I got the most difficult part of it out of the way first. "Your husband and I have been having an affair for almost a year." It was so sad to see how Mariana just sighed, how she just nodded. I figured with all the late nights at work and business trips that didn't take him out of town, I was just about to hire a private investigator to start checking on him. So, you saved me a chunk of change. "Are you still sleeping with him?" I shook my head. "No, I figured that ended when he about took my head off with a wine bottle," I said. Her brow knitted in concern, so I decided to show her. I undid the scarf around my neck and showed her what I'd been hiding all morning at work. My neck is a sight right now, all purple and black and covered in decaying cut-up flesh. I can't even imagine how the smell must be to someone not used to it. The putrefaction had spread down to my chest, which I showed her by unbuttoning my blouse. I'd had to start tearing my skin off to get any sort of relief, but you can't imagine how horrid the itching gets when your flesh starts rotting off the bone, with your skin holding it all in. I even removed my gloves to show off the pus-filled sores and bubbles forming in my wrists and fingers. Mariana went white as a sheet as she took it all in. It looked so wrong. My face perfect, as it always had been. But from the neck down, I looked like rotting roadkill. When the wave of stench finally hit her, she bolted for the bathroom. I could hear her violently throwing up from where I had sat. I'd just about buttoned my shirt back up when she came back, teetering a bit and still looking pale, but managing to remain steady. Boy, show me again. I shrugged and unbuttoned my shirt again. If she wanted a reason to barf again, she was welcome to it. But she didn't. She sat beside me, her expression of disgust melting away into one of wonder. Before Jonathan insisted I'd take care of the kids full time, I used to be a surgeon. You shouldn't be alive. You can't be alive. Are you a ghost? No, I shook my head. This just happens sometimes. I'm surprised it happened after your husband killed me. I thought it was a goner. But then I woke up with my body falling apart. Maybe I was due for a shedding. Maybe this just happens when I get hurt real bad. I don't know. Jonathan, she shuddered and shook her head. He's a bastard, but he wouldn't. He beat me with a wine bottle, Mariana. I pulled the bloody shards out of my purse. And then when it broke, he stabbed me in the neck. All because I told him the affair was over. Now she was crying. Tears rolled down her cheeks as her bottom lip wobbled with her sobs. No, oh my God, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never thought I need your help. I rebuttoned up my blouse, but I left the scarf on my lap. It'll take me a few weeks to really come back together, but my daddy told me of a way to help me heal faster. His sister was like me, fell apart, rotted like a corpse, and then looked just as pretty as ever in a few days. It took longer, though, much longer, before she started working as a mortician. It didn't take any effort at all to convince her to help me. The kids are having a sleepover at Grandma's tonight. They really are cuties. There's a wine glass laced with sleeping medication ready for Jonathan when he gets home. And I'm waiting in the basement, passing the time by ripping off more rotten skin, wondering what human flesh will taste like. Mariana's already said I can stay here while I recover. She wants to study me. I'm something she's never seen before, and she's fascinated. She says I'm a real keeper. I just didn't see him. I don't know why, I just didn't. I was driving my pickup truck down a dirt road. It was very dark out, and specks of dust hung in the air like a thick cloud when my headlights shined on them. Country music blared over the radio. I wasn't really listening to it that much. I was driving back from the bar and was headed home to my family. Maybe I was drunk. Maybe I wasn't. I don't know. All I know is that suddenly my peaceful trip ended when a kid, couldn't have been older than 5, connected with the front end of my truck and then skidded across the road. I sat in my truck stunned. My mind couldn't quite process what had just happened at first. Then it slowly started to sink in. A horrid feeling of sickened remorse flew through me. My stomach hurt, and I felt nauseous. I jumped out of my truck and ran to the boy. He was clearly dead. He had a shirt with blue stripes running across it and some black shorts. All of it was stained in blood. The poor kid's body had caved inwards, revealing a shattered rib cage and a few glimpses of his insides. And the look of shocked agony was still held on the boy's face. I could only stand there, staring down at this boy who, but a moment ago, had just been playing like any other kids his age. And now his life had been cut short, never to progress beyond that stage of innocent playfulness. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity of misery, before getting back in my truck and driving home. It's funny how an event like that could cloud your experience. The rest of that night proceeded just like all my other nights go. I got home, my wife Donna greeted me. I hung out with my daughter Mackenzie for a little bit, and I did some homework. In fact, it seemed wrong that everything should be so normal. I felt like something should be different, but it was all the same as usual. The boy's death colored my experience in a dark way. I felt disgusting, like some horridly deformed animal that didn't even deserve attention or happiness. I was a child murderer. I wanted to die. That was all I desired. I spent that night waiting for the police to arrive, even though I knew they probably wouldn't. There was, after all, no reason to suspect I had done anything. That night I dreamt of the accident, over and over. I would hit the child with my truck, watch him get projected into the other direction, and then it would repeat. All the while I felt mounting horror and guilt at what I was. But the last hit was different. As I watched for the 2,000th time, the child skidded across the rough asphalt road, blood streaking the ground, but then he moved. It was very subtle, a slight move of his shoulder, but he definitely moved. No doubt about it. After that, I fell into deeper sleep without a single more dream. The next day, I saw the child on the news, or rather, pictures of him as he had once been. His name was Lenny Drover, a happy and vibrant kid, a member of his school's Little League baseball team. I saw a video of his mother and father crying. They tried to interview her, but you couldn't understand her through the sobs. The father had said that all he wanted now was for his son to be with God, or for whoever did this to pay. I almost agreed with him. I looked around at all that I had and realized I didn't deserve any of it. Due to my negligence, that boy was dead, and I was going to get away with it, which almost made me feel worse. My daughter was in the room with me. She wasn't paying attention to the news. She was just playing with her dolls on the floor. I stared at her for a few moments with a sense of emptiness within me. Then I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. I turned to see who it was, but no one was there. I turned back around and continued watching the news. A few minutes passed, and then I heard it again. Footsteps. I looked back, but again no one was there. I looked to my daughter, but she didn't seem to notice. I got up and walked down the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place. I gazed in the dim light at my family pictures and at the little table we had up against the wall. That was when I noticed that the potted plant we had was knocked over, spilling its contents onto the ground. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I said. I went and got the broom and the dustpan, and I cleaned up the little mess. But I felt a lingering sense of dread within me. Try as I might, I couldn't explain the footsteps. That being said, though, I still viewed it as being too minor to really share with anybody. A week went by with no other strange occurrences. Over the course of that week, I had done some serious soul searching. I'd begun the healing process of thinking that perhaps I wasn't really a bad person, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, it had only been a week. I hadn't really gotten over it, but the deep, profound self-hatred and remorse had subsided slightly. That was until I was walking past that hallway in my living room, when I noticed out of the corner of my eye that something was wrong. Or, to be honest, it wasn't that I saw something. It's more like I felt something. I could see a shadow coming out of the hall bathroom. It didn't really resemble anything. It was just something blocking the light. I told myself rationally that my wife had probably just moved a box in there or something. But it was more than just the shadow. It was the feeling that it brought with it. The feeling that it saw me. But not just visually. I felt like it was looking at me, and even through me, sifting through the dark recesses of my mind to find that one event which cast a darkness on my psyche. I wanted to run, but I couldn't, because I felt it beckon me. And then my wife slammed the front door. It jolted me awake from my state, and I looked away from the hall. Then I looked back, and the shadow was gone. "Honey, I was just at the store. I bought those razors you said you needed," said my wife. "Okay, thank you," I stuttered out. I tried to push the memory of that shadow from my mind, but I just couldn't. I must be crazy. I must be. The deranged hallucinations of a guilt-ridden paranoid madman. That must have been what that was. Unless... I couldn't sleep that night. Every single noise I heard, I treated with suspicion. From the air conditioning to the ice in my refrigerator, to the beeps of the washer. I maybe got like 2 hours of sleep. The next day passed, and then the next, and then the next. The guilt had returned in full force. My wife had asked me repeatedly if something was wrong, and I would always just make up some fake story. But deep down, I felt like I shouldn't even exist. I was watching the news again one day, and they were once again talking about the boy. I watched intently on what was going on and almost began crying. Then they flashed an image of the boy smiling on the screen. Then something weird happened. The birds stopped chirping outside, and the car that was driving outside my window stopped. Then the image of the boy's smiling face began to slowly turn to a frown. My vision in my periphery turned dark, and I was stuck with tunnel vision on the boy with no way to look away. The boy's frown then turned to a look of sadness, and then one of agony as the boy's face started to rot away. He started screaming. It was louder than anything I had ever heard in my life. It started at a normal volume and then increased in magnitude with each passing moment. His skin turned purple, then black as it started to peel away, revealing his facial muscles. Blood started pouring from the horrible remains of his face. And then it just stopped. Things immediately went back to normal. The birds started chirping again, and the car started moving. By now, the TV had moved on to something else, but I could never move on. I broke down into tears. Now, my wife was incredibly concerned for me, but I dared not tell her what was bothering me. I wouldn't be able to stand the look of horror on her face as I told her what I had done. I had replayed that thought in my head of me telling her how I ran over a child, and it never gave me a pleasant feeling. I would simply wake up, go to work, not talk to anyone while I was there, and then return home. While at home, I would hardly speak. I would just watch TV or just hide in my room. I would keep all of the lights off and just stare up at the ceiling fan. When my wife would come in to check on me, I would just tell her to leave me alone. She was always a very agreeable woman and always tried to shy away from confrontation, so she gave me my space. Someday I would tell her, I told myself, but not today. Today I will simply wallow in my own misery and self-hatred and hope that this anguish would just go away. Some time had passed when I realized that enough was enough. I couldn't keep on like this. So I decided to take my daughter to the park. I felt like it would be nice to go get some fresh air. She was very excited about the arrangement as well. She was practically jumping up and down with excitement. I think it also might have been because the two of us hadn't had proper bonding time in quite a while on account of my miserable state. So we hopped in the truck and went off to the park. The park was a great woodland that had been set aside by the city for recreational use. There was a fun area for kids, a river for fishing, and a field that kids played sports in. My daughter ran around inside of the fun area with a bunch of other kids going on the slide, swinging, and all around just enjoying themselves, much like the boy had been. I sat on a bench just trying to relax. There were a few other parents around me, and I spoke to one of them for a few minutes. I was enjoying myself until I heard a group of parents talking about the boy. They say you couldn't even recognize him. It's been so long and they haven't been able to find out who did it. I say it's a failure of the police. They ought to be doing more to catch that bastard, said one of them. I know, right? They deserve to pay for what they did, said another one. I tried to blot them out, but I couldn't. I looked away from where they were standing and covered my ears. I managed to block out all of the noise. After a few seconds, I took my hands off my ears, but there was still no noise. But the feeling from the shadow had returned, like something could see into me. I looked out across the fun area, and standing behind the swings was the boy. He was looking right at me. I stood up from the bench and looked right at him. Then, from behind a slide, the same boy appeared. And then another one appeared from next to the jungle gym. And then more, then more, then more. I called for my daughter and she ran towards me. She was confused and upset that we had to leave. She kept on begging me to let her stay. "Shut the hell up, right now," I said to her. She looked at me with astonishment and then started to quietly sob. The other parents were looking at us now, and the boys were too. In fact, they were laughing at me. I ran to the car with my daughter close behind, and we went right home. My wife tried to talk to me, but I just ignored her. I ran to my room, shut the door, and tucked my head under the covers like a scared child. I stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, I told my wife she could come in, and she tried to comfort me, but nothing she said helped. I couldn't tell anymore what was going on. I felt like an astronaut that was lost in space, completely isolated from the world. I didn't know what was real anymore. I thought that I was losing my mind, that the guilt and paranoia had rotten my mind and infected my soul. A just punishment for a child killer, I told myself. But then perhaps I wasn't crazy. Perhaps the spirit of that young boy was terrorizing me for the wrong I'd committed against him. Or perhaps something darker. And that was when the feeling from the shadow returned. A feeling that someone was walking through my mind, reading me like a book. But also the feeling that I was being summoned, half by choice and half by command. I got up from my bed and followed the sense. It led me to that hallway. I looked out and saw it again, the shadow in the door. The feeling became more potent, and as I approached, it grew in intensity. I came closer and closer to the light of the bathroom and the darkness of the shadow. I came to within a foot of the door. Then I entered the room. Standing before me was what I can only describe as an emptiness. It would be a mistake to say that it appeared black or like any color at all. It was simply a location where there was just nothing. A void. A cold, empty void. All of the walls were covered in blood, and I knew whose blood they belonged to. In more places than I can count, the word guilty had been drawn with the blood of that dead boy. On the bathroom floor, pieces of his dead body were scattered about. An arm here, a leg there, and an extraordinary number of other parts. I nearly vomited from the stench. My attention was soon stuck on the void, though. It captured my gaze, and I was unable to look away from it. The feeling of dread and anguish was unbearable at this point. Then it spoke. "You know what you must do," it said. But it said it in the voice of the boy. "I know." And just like that, my bathroom was spotless. The emptiness had gone, as did the body parts and the blood. And just like that, something had left me as well. The sadness was gone, as was the guilt and the feeling of dread. In fact, I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I knew what I had to do. So, I'm going to commit suicide. I have my revolver in my hand with one bullet. There is nothing in this world left for me. I don't know if I am motivated by the ghost of that kid, the command of a demon, or the motivations of madness. But it doesn't really matter to me at this point. What's the difference anyways between ghosts of the dead and ghosts of the mind after all? A fitting end for a child murderer. Something tells me that boy is smiling right now. This took place maybe around the age of 13. Let me set the scene. I had my first serious boyfriend, Sam. Sam was a nerdy kind of guy. We had met at church. When he asked me out, I was over the moon, as another girl had been talking to him at the same time. I was flattered he had chosen me. At the point in time this story takes place, I was having a lot of issues at home. I had attempted to take my life during my relationship. and had a lot of issues with self-harm. My relationship with my parents was terrible, still is. That probably explains why I never told them any of this. Besides my personal problems, I'd say the relationship was running smoothly until Sam came into contact with Allison. I don't recall exactly when or where Sam met Allison. I believe it was at his Air Cadets. It's almost like she just appeared. Whenever Sam and I were going through a rough patch, he would talk to Allison, and she would console him. It made me really uncomfortable at the time, being a jealous 13-year-old. Our key communication was over Skype, and he lived a good 40 minutes away from me. On average, I saw him twice a week. Once on a Saturday, in which I would catch 2 buses to his home. The second being at church on a Sunday. He would often tell me stories about his long conversations with Allison, how she was hilarious, but she didn't like me, although I had never spoken to her myself. I assume this was due to him mainly speaking to her during our childish arguments. I first came into contact with Allison during an argument with Sam. We were bickering about something unimportant, and a message popped up on my Skype. It was from Allison. I don't recall what exactly the message said, as this was in 2014, but I tried to gain access to my old Skype to go through the messages, but have not been able to. But I do remember her insulting me repeatedly and saying I didn't deserve Sam and I should have died. In regards to my suicide attempt, I responded harshly and told her to F off, or something of the sorts. Was it polite? No. I was extremely standoffish at this age. My response seemed to anger her. I was bombarded with call after call. I declined every single one. I reported to Sam what had gone on, and he said he had told her to leave me alone. It was good for a while. This didn't affect me too much. This was semi-normal for me, as high school relationship drama was almost an everyday occurrence at my school. Looking back on it, Sam was almost definitely cheating on me, but I was too naive and in childish love to care. My second incident with Allison was on a summer afternoon. I was relaxing on Sam's bed after an afternoon of messing around. He had gone to complete a chore in the kitchen and had left his computer open. I decided to check my Facebook and went to log in. On the screen was a chat with Allison. Being curious, I scrolled through the chat. I was greeted with an onslaught of naked images of her. This started a huge fight, as you can imagine. Sam said that she was just a jealous stalker girl. My third interaction with Allison was at my local library. Allison must have been 16, as she was completing some work experience at the time. I have and still am an avid book reader. I was there with my mother and sister when I saw her at the counter. She stared me down, and it took me aback as I didn't recognize her to begin with. It then clicked. I was more annoyed than anything. I didn't pick up a book, instead opting to hang around my sister as she checked some books. Allison's eyes never left me. The time came to leave as Mum was renting the books, as she made small talk with Allison. I was surprised at how polite and well-mannered she was in comparison to the girl who had messaged me. I began to feel guilty for the way I had responded to her. Once at home, I hopped on my phone and wrote a message to her, apologizing for the way I had spoken to her. The message I received back from her was a different tone altogether, that I was a fat bitch. I had no right to date Sam, and all I brought him was misery. This time, her words really did affect me. I called Sam and begged him to never contact her again. I remember vividly sobbing and crying for hours. This happened a couple more times, each time escalating in severity. Threats to beat my lights out were sent. My mental health was greatly affected. I wasn't afraid of her, more upset at the things she said. I never took a single threat seriously. To this day, I have no idea why Sam stayed in contact with her. I began to avoid the library. My relationship with Sam continued. On one day, I got into a large argument with my mother and called Sam, sobbing. He consoled me and told me it was going to be all right. Impulsively, I decided to go for a run, leaving my phone at home. I wanted to be out of the home. I was gone for maybe an hour or two. I returned home to an onslaught of messages from Sam, deeply concerned for my well-being. I apologized and explained the situation. I reminded her this entire time I had not blocked Allison. She messaged me with the usual drivel. I was so used to her threats at this point, it hardly fazed me. The same threat happened again. I'll beat your lights out. Calling her bluff, I replied, Go on then. You don't even know where I live. She replied with my address. My heart skipped a beat. All the threats of violence were all too real now. I remember shaking uncontrollably. I sobbed on the phone to Sam. I begged him to block her and never speak to her again. He continued to speak to her. I never did. New girls appeared in her place, but none were as invasive as her. We ended the relationship after a year and a bit. In one of the messages I sent to him regarding our breakup, I spoke about Allison and his stalker girls. It's been a long time since then. Sam and I occasionally speak, and I'd say we are on good terms. He's in a band and I'm studying still. At the time, I didn't realize the severity of her actions. The fact she had gone onto the computer base at my library and searched for my address didn't pass my mind until many years later. It still sends shivers down my spine. What would she have been actually capable of doing, I'll never know. I truly hope no one finds out. I tried finding her online out of curiosity to no avail. If she was capable of that amount of calculation at 16 years old, I wondered what she was capable of now. I hope this serves as a word of warning to parents to look out for their kids. I know this story may not be as severe as many in the subreddit, but I thought I'd share this tale. So I'm not sure how many people know what FetLife is, but basically it's a fetish BDSM social media site. Facebook for those into kink, basically. It was used a lot for hookups, dating, etc. I was primarily into it to read some short erotica that was posted in the forums sometimes, and finding more like-minded friends, but I did eventually branch out and meet some people off of there. Most of them were really cool, others not so much. They were just kind of boring. All in all, it was pretty okay. But after talking to one guy and meeting up with him only once, I got really bad vibes and decided to not go any further. He just creeped me out for some reason. He was not ready to give up. Things went quiet for a while, and then 2 weeks later, I kept getting harassing messages from blank accounts that I am assuming were all his, as they were all different variations of the same screen name, but words and letters arranged in a different order. They were pretty harmless things like, "Why don't you love me?" "I thought we had something special." "Hello, please talk to me." Things of that nature. Annoying, but not dangerous. Well, one day, he shows up to my work. He didn't know where that was. Now, I did work at McDonald's, so it wasn't that weird, and luckily I work in the back at the drive-thru. I only saw him out of the corner of my eye when I went up to grab the cups, and I didn't think he recognized me. I had shaved my head. It was trendy at the time, and when I met him, I had a wig on. I never told him I had a shaved head either. He called out my name, though. I rushed back and told my manager, and he got asked to leave. I never saw or heard from him for 2 weeks. I get another message from a totally new, unnamed account, but this one was much more sinister. I knew it was him. It had to be. When I had only known him online, I had sent him videos and pictures. Stupid, I know. When he found out that I was dating someone new, I knew this person in real life, but we both had a FetLife, so we added our relationship online. He got angry and threatened to expose me. And he didn't just know where I worked anymore. He knew where I went to school, the names of my mother and sister. They knew where they worked. He knew what stores I shopped at, which friend I hung out with the most. He didn't know her name, but he gave me really detailed descriptions of how she looked. He knew where I lived. Luckily, nothing happened, and I moved soon after that, and I never heard from him again. But needless to say, I was very spooked, and it scared me away from online dating for good. I made a police report, so maybe that scared him away. But to my FetLife stalker, please let's not meet ever again. I met a guy online back in August of last year. We immediately hit it off. I was reluctant to get into a relationship, though, as I had been cheated on a few months prior and lied through that entire relationship. Catching feelings for anyone again scared the hell out of me, but this guy was so sweet and nice that I just trusted him and was willing to risk it for him. Skip to mid-September. We had both admitted feelings for each other a while before this, but he was reluctant to ask me out. I wasn't sure why, but I figured he was just waiting for the right moment. Which he was, because he slipped that his birthday was coming up and I pointed out how come he's turning 19 and still in high school. Then he said that he isn't 18, he's 17 and turning 18 in a few days. This pissed me off because although we've never been sexual, I'm 18 and I do not like being lied to. We both met in a place that's only for 18 plus people. He pointed out that I never directly asked him his age. I just assumed because of where we met. Despite this, when he turned 18 and asked me out, I said yes. We lasted less than a month. He would start fights every single day over the dumbest shit. If I took over 10 minutes to reply, he would get pissed at me and told me I need to tell him when I was going to go do stuff, so he wasn't waiting for my message. He got mad that I've been in relationships before him, despite none of them turning out good, etc. So I broke up with him. I thought maybe in the future things would stop, because this is his first relationship and he was just inexperienced. I told him multiple times, calmly, that things need to change, and once the fight stopped, we can try again. But they never stopped, for more than a few days. One time he lied to me saying some girl had been flirting with him and asked if he was single or taken, just so I'd confirm our relationship, which I didn't, because we weren't dating anymore and he got mad. I pointed out it was obviously a lie, but he insisted it happened. Only later that evening did he admit it was a lie. Eventually, I shut off my Snapchat map because I didn't want him knowing where specifically I lived, and he got mad that I didn't trust him. One of my best in real life friends messaged me asking why he was requesting to follow her. I checked his Instagram and he had started following everyone who was following me. I told him to unfollow them because he doesn't even know any of them, and it's kind of weird. He got mad, but he did unfollow them. 2 weeks ago, I woke up one morning and he told me we needed to talk. He asked me why I've been lying to him, why I've been hiding things behind his back. I asked him what he was talking about because I never lied to him, nor hid anything from him. He said he's been messaging all my friends on Instagram, asking for information about me, who I've dated, what I've been doing, etc. He asked me why I've been FaceTiming people behind his back, not telling him everything about my past relationships. I don't know if I was more shocked by the fact that he did this, or the fact that these people were actually giving him info about me. I never did anything behind his back, though. The only person I had ever FaceTimed me first, randomly, and for 30 minutes just to play 8-ball on iMessage. He even mentioned talking to people who I haven't talked to in months. He also made alternate accounts, befriending people from my past, voice chatting with them, playing games with them, all just to get info from them about me once they opened up. Anyways, he even mentioned that my ex had messaged me, which I never told anyone, so I have no idea how he found that out. My Snapchat kept logging me out, so I think he hacked into my Snapchat to read my convos with people also. He found my old Reddit and went back 2 years of comment history to get mad at stuff I've said in the past. When I asked him how he found out about my one ex contacting me, he said, "You don't deserve to know," before proceeding to block me on everything. The day after, he emailed me saying that there's nothing left to say. We're just acquaintances now, etc., etc. I told him, nah, we aren't even acquaintances anymore. He's just some crazy dude I dated, and it's his loss in the end because he caused this by doing detective work, as he liked to put it. He said he did all this because he was curious, not that he didn't trust me, and he found lots of stuff he didn't want to. I guess about my past relationships, because that's all he really ever mentioned. His little tangent went on for quite a while, saying he's my loss and he could have made me happy and blah, blah, blah. I told him he never could have made me happy. His money, which wasn't much, maybe, but not him as a person. I'm sure there's a lot of examples I'm missing out on saying, but in the end I blocked him, and I hope to never see or hear from him again. But I fear after all he's done, that he'll pull some shit from that You show. So, I was living with my grandparents at the time, and they lived in a far out residential area of town at the end of a road that then leads into farming areas. They were in a townhouse complex, and fortunately, right at the front, which meant it was a 1 minute walk out of the complex to the bus stop right across the street. My stop was the very last stop on the route. One day I was waiting at the bus stop that's right near the trendy downtown area of my city, but a little out of the way. It's a relatively small city and doesn't have the greatest bus system. There were only two buses that stopped at this particular stop, the one to my place and the one into the next town over. This was its last stop before hitting the freeway. The stop is also right next to the restaurant where my then fiance, now husband, worked as a manager. I was sitting there texting my fiance as he was just starting to close up. It was around 4 p.m., but it was a lunch joint, and a kind of sketchy, dirty-looking guy comes up and sits down on the bench. There was plenty of room, so it was no big deal. After a moment, he starts to make conversation. This was around 2 years ago, so I don't remember exactly what he was saying. But I asked if he was taking the bus into nearby city, and he says yes, he lived there. The whole time he was there, he was almost comically manspreading, with one leg up on the bench, proudly displaying his crotch. I ignored this and politely responded to him when necessary while texting my fiance. My bus arrives. Creepy guy gets on. This is not the bus to nearby town. I'm a little weirded out at this point and mention it to my fiance in my texts. I was sitting at the back of the bus and he was sitting at the very front, but turned all the way around so he was facing me, staring at me. Oh, hell no. The bus goes through some residential areas and then makes a brief stop at a little strip mall, and then it's just houses from there until the end. I'm texting my fiance and getting more and more creeped out as he does nothing but look at me when I'm not watching. We hit the strip mall, and he doesn't get off. Now I'm legit freaked out. There's nowhere else for him to go. I text my fiance and tell him this, and he immediately calls me, says to act normal. He's coming to meet me at my bus stop. Don't get off anywhere else. Don't interact. My husband is now a security guard and going into policing, so he's taking the situation pretty seriously. I somewhat loudly respond, "Okay, yeah, I'll see you there, babe." Creepy guy immediately turns around and faces front. Holy crap. I spend the next 5 minutes anxiously thinking of what I'll do if he isn't there when I get to my stop. I can't just go into my house if he gets off the bus. He'll know where I live. We come around the corner to the very last stop, and this guy still hasn't gotten off. He's very intentionally facing as far away from me as possible now. I get off the bus just as my fiance pulls up, and this guy does not. This is the last stop, and the bus is now going on the reverse route. This guy was following me. My fiance ended up walking me to my door, checking the house and making me lock everything up until my grandparent got home. I was pretty shaken, to be honest. He went back to work to finish closing up, but came back again later. All in all, I'm lucky to have a husband who took me so seriously, and I'm not sure what would have happened had I not gotten that call from him that he was coming. I live in a house that is huge and beautiful, but there's one problem. I'm often home alone and our house has giant windows. I'm a 23-year-old girl that's going to college nearby, and I live at home in order to afford school. My mom and stepdad have much more of a fun nightlife than I do, so they often go out of town. We live on a lake in a nice private lake neighborhood that's supposed to be monitored, but it often isn't due to lazy patrolmen. I have no self-defense because I'm so small. In a neighboring town, we have another house, and I used to live in it. We had bought it so that I could live close to my college, as it is 3 streets away from it. I had a stalker there that would leave gifts, footprints by my window, and letters. I knew who she was. She had been a classmate at my college that was not accepting, that I had no interest in dating girls. I filed a police report, and we have been called a few times because she had been seen entering our backyard, even though we haven't been back to that house in a while. I definitely know that gut feeling when I'm being watched. I'm back at our main house due to that experience and have been there for a few months now. It's 40 minutes away from our other house, and it's extremely difficult to find. We live on a road impossible to find on GPS, and only my closest friends have been out here to visit. 2 weeks ago, I called the cops. I had been home alone, sitting upstairs, and I saw a figure in our yard, and then heard doorknobs being rattled downstairs shortly after. After the cops showed up 45 minutes later from getting lost, they found no one and assumed it was someone attempting to break in. Whoever it was definitely saw me, because our windows are huge and located everywhere, and I sat right beside 3 windows that are 15 feet by 13 feet. This house was custom built for my mom and stepdad. We have giant windows everywhere, including all of the bedrooms. Some of our windows are so big because they previously have belonged to an old church at 17 feet high. Even my mom has 4 large windows that luckily fit blinds, but most of our windows are too large for blinds or curtains. Basically, everyone can see into our house, whether they're in our front yard, backyard, in their boat, etc. It doesn't matter. They can definitely see into a big portion of the house, and the house itself is huge. There are 8 doors that I constantly check to make sure that they are locked. I have 2 dogs, one of them being an English bulldog. A week ago, I got home and found a framed art print of a bulldog with saran wrapped around it. There was no note and no context to it, so we have no idea who left it. I'm an artist, and I often share pictures of my bulldog, so I feel it's aimed towards me. We asked all our friends, family, and even neighbors. Nobody knows who left it. Tonight, I finished some assignments and immediately laid down in bed. After about 20 minutes, I heard knocks on my window. My dog was in the hallway and started barking as soon as it happened. After laying down for 10 minutes frozen in fear, I got up to try and see if there was something, or someone, out there lurking in the dark. There wasn't, from what I could tell. This all happened tonight, and I'm still laying here scared. The cops take so long to get out here and would probably get lost again, and my anxiety is so high, I guess from my past experiences. I've called my older brother and messaged friends to let them know what's going on. All 8 doors are locked. I triple-checked them. I honestly don't know why I wrote this out. It sounds silly writing it, but the feeling of being watched is so scary. Hi there. I've been a long-time lurker and found stories somewhat similar to what has happened to me. I live in Massachusetts in a populated city, so I mostly rely on public transportation to get places. This included the subway, and living here nearly all my life, I have many stories regarding the subway, such as a guy sitting next to me and touching himself, a woman punching me in the face, and the story I'm going to tell today. Me and most of my friends would rely on public transportation to get ourselves to school. This happened in our sophomore year. Our high school was placed smack dab in the middle of the city and around some colleges. I had a friend who would go home with me every day, and we both used the subway. Living in a populated area, I was aware of the potential creeps and dangerous people. It was around 5 p.m. during the winter, and it was quickly getting dark. After our club was finished, me and my friend began our journey to the subway station. This included walking through a college campus and many streets. It was usually less than a 15-minute walk to the station, so we would just talk and mind our business, things surrounding us. Halfway through our walk, I had a feeling that someone was behind us, which wasn't surprising since it could have been other students, and this was a heavily populated place. Me and my friend were slow walkers, so I was basically waiting for this person to pass us like others would. Although I waited for a long time and still felt this person on our tail. When we got to a crosswalk, they were still behind us, so quickly and slightly, I turned around to take a peek at them. My heart started beating faster when I glanced at them. At first, I thought they were wearing a ski mask, but I was mistaken. They wore a black beanie and a black scarf tightly wrapped around their mouth and nose. He was about 50 years old, or older, and had a dark green windbreaker on, along with baggy black pants. What irked me a little bit was how close he was to me and my friend now. He was just less than 5 feet away, and I was terrified that I was going to accidentally smack him with my JanSport backpack, which I've always had stuffed with textbooks and whatnot. Me and my friend crossed the road, and as we continued to walk, I became more and more wary. He was a lot closer now than before the walk, and he wore heavy Timberland boots that would crush and pound against the salt on the snow. As a girl, I've always felt insecure about my body, and I was just terrified for me and my friend, since all this man could see is the back of both of us, most likely eyeing our bodies. No, both of us were 14 years old and super passive, so confronting this person was the last thing I wanted to do. I saw that my friend would glance at her phone every now and then and go on it to respond to texts, so I ended up texting her. Man behind us. Creepy, it's been 10 minutes. She replies, I noticed. I don't know what to do. Since we were on a college campus, there were often large tours given by people in crowds of tourists. We began walking at a faster pace, and I heard his footsteps quicken as well. I leaned in and whispered to her to walk through the crowd and take an immediate right on a different path that we'd never take to the station. It just led to a different gate exiting the college, and outside of the gate, we'd be about 50 feet away from the subway station. So we did exactly that and walked through a crowd of 40 to 50 tourists by a popular statue. Afterwards, we were speed walking by this point, and I looked behind me to check whether he was still behind us, and luckily he wasn't. We proceeded to walk down the stairs towards the station, still shaken by what happened. We paid to get through the gates, and then we got on the platform of the train that would take us home. There was a certain exit I liked to take at the station. I would get off to go home, so we walked further towards the left side of the platform with more benches. We found an empty bench somehow amidst the large crowd at the platform. It was Friday after all, and almost 6 p.m. I sat on the right, and my friend sat on the left. Not even 30 seconds after we sat down, I felt a presence standing right next to me at the bench. It was him. I saw the Tims. Not only that, he was just facing me, heavily breathing and most likely staring down entirely, as I saw his shoes pointed at me and baggy black pants stuffed within his boots. I was terrified and nudged my friend as she was on her phone. She was still holding her phone but froze and didn't continue to click on anything. Just as we were frozen in our trance, the announcement started to play, stating that the train was arriving. We both shot up, and as the train began to come and I took her arm, proceeding to lead her to the right side of the platform and through the crowd, we stood in front of the doors of a train cart, along with many others. I looked to my right, and there he was, in front of another train door to our right. Each train cart came with 3 pairs of doors that would automatically open and close. We chose the middle door, and I thought it was odd that he was at the right door instead of following us in. Then I thought that he would probably isolate himself and follow us off the train cart at our stop. I looked up at the train board to see that another train was going to come in 2 minutes. And as the train doors opened, people began to spill out. We waited for everyone to shuffle out, and the group at his door had already shuffled out, so he was in the cart already. I still held my friend's arm, and I made us go into the cart last, standing in front of the doors. There were less people on the train, but all of the seats were taken, and there were 1 to 2 left empty per row. I could see him on the right side of the cart, staring at us as he stood by a metal pole. The train would make a warning noise that would be about 3 beeps. This indicated that the doors would close. These beeps were half seconds. At the first beep, I instantly yanked me and my friend out of the cart and back on the platform. The doors quickly closed and I sighed in relief. The train started moving within 5 seconds, but within those 5 seconds, horrifyingly enough, the man sprinted up to the closed doors, which had 2 transparent windows, and stared down me and my friend. We backed up immediately. He still had the beanie and the scarf on, but all I could see were his menacing eyes. Then he proceeded to bang on the glass, making us both jump, but it was shortly cut off as the train cart was pulling away. Still looking at him banging on the glass, as the train moved into the tunnel, my friend fell to the floor and started crying. There weren't many people on the platform, since everyone boarded the train. I began to console her, and tear up as well. We were both pretty young and oblivious to everything. I helped her up, and we got on the next train and sat down, blankly staring out of the windows across from us, which showed the dark subway tunnels in motion. Afterwards, we were near our homes and parted ways. We never told anyone about this, although we should have, thinking back to it all. I met up with the same friend a couple days ago, and we were reminded of this event. Overall, I'm glad that we were both safe and out of harm's way in that moment, but I just felt so stupid knowing that I could have gotten someone's attention since we were near big crowds or possibly a security guard. So, man who followed me and my friend from our high school to the subway platform, let's not meet again. Hey everyone. So, I'm a guy from the UK. I live in a town in Wales, albeit not the little villages most people imagine. My town is a popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't overly relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everyone some context. I did actually post this on a separate Reddit account several years ago in a different subreddit. However, I highly exaggerated it for the sake of story, and this was a creative writing subreddit, I believe. I can't fully remember, I just remember the story I told wasn't totally honest. So if you think you've heard something similar before, then you probably have. This is the full truth of what happened, and is likely way less exciting than the original story, but oh well. So it started when I was around 15 years old, so about 8 years ago. I was dating a girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually get the train to hers and back, however, this one night her family weren't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was about 19-20 and was pretty chill. The plan was to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mother, and the whole thing got kind of heated, and I was kicked out of the house and told I couldn't stay over. It was about 2 a.m., and I didn't want to call my own parents and worry of waking them up. My mother is a very strict woman, so I began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a quarter worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home by around 3:30. So I walked along the weird concrete bit just above the beach, not sure what it's called, and I stopped after about half an hour of walking, as there's a public toilet which is kind of run down, but also open 24 hours, and I was desperate. I was expecting it to be empty, or just have a homeless dude sleeping in it, but I was wrong. There was a guy using the urinal. This guy looked to be in his mid to late 50s, maybe. A little on the overweight side, but not extremely. He had gray, messy-ish hair, but other than that, he looked pretty normal. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember he made a quick joke about something, I don't remember what. I politely laughed, did my business, and left. After about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather had gotten pretty bad. It started to rain heavy and the wind was picking up. I seem to remember this was around November time, so it was pretty cold. Anyway, so I'm walking and a car drives by, beeps and pulls over just in front of me. I had assumed it was someone I know, but couldn't think who. Got to the car and the dude from the toilet was inside. He asked me where I was headed and I told him. He said that was a long walk and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, and he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I probably should have refused, but the weather was bad, and at the time he wasn't giving off any weird vibes. The drive took about 15 minutes, I think, maybe 20. The more I was in the car with him, the more I started to get vibes that there was something off about this guy. He was telling me his best friend was a 14-year-old lad who stays over at his place a lot and they drink together. And if I ever wanted to join, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully remember what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask to someone that you're giving a simple lift home to. Anyways, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I told him my house wasn't accessible by road and that I would walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and told me to ring him when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I got home okay. I asked him what his name was, as at this point he knew my full name, and he just said Pete. I said, Pete what? My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me, just kept saying, just call me Pete. I later found out that Pete was a fake name, too. Anyway, I got into my house and texted him, just to let him know I was home safe. Probably a bad decision, but back then I was full of bad decisions, to be honest. The next day came and I was expecting everything to go back to normal. It didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. Started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me well. I replied to the first few and then started ignoring them. He then started trying to ring me. Every single evening. I would ignore most of his calls, but he would often repeatedly ring until I answer. He was sending me these texts, inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me he'd just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come play with him. He was telling me a story of a friend he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old I was talking about, and accidentally let slip that the guy called him John. I collared him about this. I said, I thought your name was Pete. He said, oh no, my friend's name is John. I said, you just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom? He said, oh, well, some people call me John. It's like a nickname, but his name is John too. He hesitated saying this, and I kind of clicked that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing, but he kept asking. After a while, my mom wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me and ringing me was. I told her, and she rang him himself from her phone and told him that if he carried on texting and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew it. I always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon and played with her for 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, just near where he had dropped me off. I started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would always notice the car lights were always left on, and the engine was always running. Also, I recognized his car. I would occasionally notice the car door open and a large flash from that direction as if someone was taking pictures. I started changing the time I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure it out and start showing up either earlier or late to coincide with when I was walking her. This went on for months, and I never mentioned it to anyone, but one day it just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. I never saw his car anymore. Not text messages or phone calls from him. It all just stopped. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year and had that for another 2 years. I dug out my old phone when I was around 18 or 19 after the aforementioned dog died. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone and wanted to transfer them over to my PC so that I always had them. I turned on a phone which had been turned off for several years and still had the old SIM in it. That's when I got my final message from Pete. It was an odd one and was about 14 months old. It said something along the lines of, "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I just thought you should know that over New Year's, I was diagnosed with an illness, and I have been told I don't have long left to live. You were a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at," he sent me his address, "and would really appreciate it if you would come around just so I can have a last chat with you. I've got some beers in, and if it gets too late, you can stay the night. Just drop me a phone call when you want to come around so that I can get everything ready for you. See you soon." No idea if Pete, John, was genuinely ill or just trying to lure me to his house. Never been to the address he sent me, and never responded to him or heard from him since. I didn't reply to him, and that was the last I heard from the guy. So yeah, that's the story. Not tremendously exciting, but kind of had a big impact on me during those years. Hope you all enjoyed. As a criminal psychologist, I've heard it all. Virtually any outrageous reason you can think of for why someone committed the act they did, I've heard. Now, when I say I believe someone who told a preposterous story, it's because I do believe that is the reason they did it. Due to whatever mental illness they might suffer from, there's times I believe them when they say a leprechaun told them to kill their neighbor. Obviously, I don't believe an actual leprechaun manifested itself to this person and that they actually only did what they did because they are crazy. But in my line of work, you have to talk to the person, as if what they were hallucinating about actually happened. This case was different, though. I think I believe this story, and not because he thinks that's what happened, but because I've had a feeling for a long time he was not suffering from any mental affliction, and might actually have been telling the truth. I'm going to post the transcript from my interview with him here on No Sleep. There will, of course, be some redacted information, names were changed, and I've cut out a lot of my trivial interjections in the interest of flow and pacing. Any interjection from me will be in parentheses, and it will otherwise be told from his first-person perspective. I'll leave it up to you to decide if he's crazy. A little about him before we start. He was a PhD-educated professor of biology, anatomy, and pathology, and serves as the chairman of the biology department at the local university. He had no personal or familial history of any kind of mental illness. Please introduce yourself and why you are here. My name is Michael, redacted, and I shot my friends Dave, redacted, and Gary, redacted, right outside our personal science lab at the docks near, redacted, Marina. Start from the beginning. It all started a few days ago when the school year concluded. We were taking our annual camping trip to celebrate the end of exams. It was me, Dave, Gary, and John, all fellow biology department professors. We go to, redacted, Provincial Park in Canada every year. We spend a few days at a campground and then we go to Deep Woods Wilderness Camp that we have to use our canoes to get to. That is our favorite part, the deep woods. There's never anybody there and we're all alone. The vacation went well at first. Once we found a nice site in the backwoods, that started off great too. I'm scuba certified and we had never been to this part of redacted lake before. We were more backwoods than we'd ever been. I was eager to dive here. How's the visibility? Most lakes I've heard like this, the visibility isn't great, or there's nothing to see. True, there's not much to see. It's the same kind of fish you can see in a city park pond, but there's something about diving in a body of water few people ever touch. It's mostly unsullied by people's garbage and whatnot. Tell me what you saw down there. I didn't dive until our second day. It was very uneventful, but part of the enjoyment for me, like I said, was being 30 feet down and not seeing any trash or anything man-made at all. I went out further towards the center of the lake. Visibility was low, so I didn't see it right away. It kind of crept up on me. At first, I thought it was a small propeller plane or something, but I quickly realized it was too big. It was irregularly shaped for sure, and had a large shaft toward what I figured was the rear of the craft, protruding upwards that had a small fin at the top. The fin was probably about 15 feet or so below water level. I swam to what I thought was the front of the craft and saw a rounded area sitting atop the otherwise pointed bow. It had a little window that I thought must be the cockpit. The glass was broken and it was impossible to see anything inside. I quickly came to the conclusion based on the design of this vessel, it did not appear to be any man-made craft of any kind that I have ever seen or heard of, and that I was potentially looking at a UFO. I reserved full judgment on whether or not this was a UFO until I got a second opinion. John was also a diver and had brought a tank. I would have him go down with me to investigate further. I really shouldn't have been diving by myself anyway. John was immediately intrigued when I told him I had found an aircraft at the bottom of the lake, and it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. He was ready to go in minutes. We took a canoe out to where I thought it was to save air, and we went down. We found it relatively quickly. He did as thorough swim around as I did. Seeing it again, it was kind of shaped like a large arrowhead. Look up an F-117 Nighthawk. That's kind of what it looked like, though it looked much more alien in design. It wasn't flat underneath. It had a bulkier cargo area or something below. John found a large opening in the hull underneath, what appeared to be the left wing of the craft. He was ready to enter, but I stopped him. My air was too low and it was getting dark. I motioned for him to meet me at the surface, so we swam back up. I told him I needed to switch to my other tank. Each of us had brought 2 tanks, if there was any chance of us entering the craft. I also told him it would be much better to wait until morning. We spent that night telling Gary and Dave what we had seen. Gary immediately became paranoid. He was of the mind, since we even knew this craft existed, that we were in danger from the government. If we swam into the aircraft and actually found an ET, the pilot, we were as good as dead. We eventually decided we were indeed going in. We toyed with Gary, saying the pilot was probably long gone. He swam out the back, assimilated into human form, and probably replaced, and is now living as the Queen of England. We eventually went to bed, but I hardly slept at all. I don't think John did either. The next morning, John and I went down again. We approached the hull breach. It was more than large enough for us to fit in one at a time. It's important to note the exterior of the aircraft was metallic, but it was difficult to say what material. What I found interesting is that the outer hull was completely free of aquatic fungus or algae, or even rust. Anything that would indicate it had been there for a while. This led me to believe this may be a recent crash, and that made me nervous. We secured a rope to the outside of the craft so we could follow it to find our way out if we got turned around at all. Once we got inside, the interior told a different story. The inside was very dilapidated, nowhere near the almost pristine nature of the outer hull. Judging from the aquatic plant life and algae that we could see growing, and the amount of fish that had settled and were darting out of every crevice we swam by, it appeared this vessel had been down here for some time. We appeared to be in some sort of cargo area. There was an open doorway near the back. We looked in, and it appeared to be an engine room. We examined what we believed to be the engine, but rubble and pillars had fallen, and it blocked our access to the greater part of the area. We proceeded down a narrow corridor towards the bow. We swam right and came to a ladder. This ladder went up a few feet, and we saw what appeared to be a hatch that was closed. We swam up to it and examined it. We pushed on it first to no avail, and searched around the area until I saw what appeared to be a lever off to the side. I motioned to John, and he motioned for me to pull it. I did so, and we heard something near the hatch mechanically release, which also released a large amount of air bubbles into the water, but the hatch remained closed. We puzzled over it for a few seconds before John pulled out his diving knife. He attempted to slide it into one of the edges on the right side of the hatch, and was able to penetrate a few inches. He worked it for a few minutes, and the hatch inched open slightly before the blade snapped. It had opened just enough for us to get our fingers in, so we tried pushing and pulling. There was much resistance, but with our combined efforts, the hatch slowly began to open. We swam up into what could only have been the cockpit. I saw the broken window I had seen from the outside. John swam ahead and around what appeared to be a large chair, probably for the pilot. I heard him let out a muffled cry of extreme surprise, and he swam back towards me faster than I had ever seen him swim. His mouthpiece had fallen out of his mouth, and he had put it back in. His eyes were wild. He pointed to the chair, and he made back and forth motions with his hands like he was turning a steering wheel. I was slightly confused, but then he pretended he was using a joystick and made muffled sounds with his mouth. I realized he was pretending to fly a plane, and the sounds he was making were supposed to be the machine guns. I then realized he was trying to tell me the pilot was still sitting in his chair. I motioned for him to calm down. I was afraid as well, but I knew I needed to see this. I motioned to him that I was going to go and look for myself. I motioned for him to stay, but he shook his head. I then proceeded to swim slowly around the chair, and he followed behind me. Any doubt that this was a UFO was then extinguished. The being sitting in the chair was humanoid, but definitely not human. Its head was about 20% larger than a human's, I'd say, and it was probably about 4 feet tall. Its arms were floating lifelessly in the water and were disproportionately long. I took note immediately about how there appeared to be no rod or skin breakdown on this being, despite the length of time the cargo area indicated this craft had been underwater. I knew John and I needed to actually speak, so I motioned for us to retreat. we returned to the surface and discussed our options. After the initial holy shits and what the hells, we discussed our next options. The first was to simply leave and not tell anybody, including Gary and Dave, what we had seen. We knew we'd never be able to keep that secret, so that was out. We discussed a few more options before I realized what we needed to do. Or should I say, what I badly wanted to do. I told John we needed to get it back to our lab we had at the docks and perform an autopsy. He looked at me like I was a complete idiot. He asked how the actual hell we were supposed to get it back to the States. I told him my plan, and he said it might just work. We then retrieved the body carefully and loaded it into the canoe. I rowed back to shore while John swam. I don't think he wanted to sit in the boat with the body. Unsurprisingly, Gary and Dave absolutely flipped their shit when we got back. I told them we were leaving right now, going back to the car and driving straight home. They were confused at first, but then John told them what was down there was not only a UFO, but the pilot was in the canoe. Gary turned white as a ghost when he saw it, and Dave was intrigued. I then laid out my plan. We drove an oversized cargo van. There was a bench seat in the back that set about a foot off the floor so you could put crap underneath it. My plan was to leave the body in the canoe, pack it with ice and cover it up. Then put the canoe in the back with us instead of on the roof. It would just fit since the front end would be able to fit underneath the bench seat in the back. We then drive straight to our lab. What kind of lab is this? You just have your own lab? We use it for ourselves. It's rented space in one of the warehouses. We mostly use it to set up lab assignments for students or test new assignments we think of to make sure they are actually a viable assignment. Okay, please continue. Gary freaks out and almost loses it. He says if we get randomly searched when crossing the border back into the States, they'll find the body, and we're all as good as black bagged. Dave tells him that as long as everyone shuts the hell up, and only the driver talks, we'll be fine. We all argued for about 20 minutes about it before it was settled. We were taking this body back to our lab. We got everything packed up and ended up leaving some things we could replace later, since we were in such a hurry. It was a 3-hour drive, but only 1 hour to the border. We just had to get across. I would be the driver and would do all the talking. Gary was a nervous wreck, as we watched cars, seemingly at random, get beckoned over to a separate drive area to be inspected. He held it together somehow. We crossed over without incident. Gary about had a mental breakdown as we pulled away from the station and were home free. We changed the ice several times, but otherwise the canoe cooler held up. I drove slightly below the speed limit since we certainly didn't need to get pulled over. We got to our lab at about 2:30 in the afternoon. We smuggled the cadaver into our lab and set it up on the table. We locked all the doors and made sure the windows were drawn as well. I realized at this time we were at a point of no return. We were about to perform an unauthorized autopsy on an alien life form. We had no idea how we were supposed to publish our results, or what we were supposed to do when we concluded. We were all likely to get black-bagged if this was something the government wanted to keep secret, but we had come this far, and there was no way we were going to stop now. We video recorded the entire thing. My initial examination revealed the ET did not have a sternum similar to humans. It had 2 large sternum-like bones on the left and right sides of its chest, but its center was soft, making it an easy choice for a first incision. We cut deep in order to open it up. It was fascinating. It appeared to have all the same internal organs as we do, just in different spots, of course. It was hard to tell what was what aside from the lungs. We concluded they must be the lungs because they were filled with water, initially indicating the cause of death was drowning. There did not appear to be any trauma anywhere else on the ET's body, so we also concluded it may not have actually crashed as initially thought. While we had it opened, we labeled all the organs we thought we could. Whether or not it was actually correct, we obviously had no idea. But for the sake of completion, we assigned everything and came to the conclusion the ET had a heart, liver, lungs, kidneys, and possibly a spleen. We then moved to its head. Its brain was similar to humans, and that it looked similar, and as far as we could tell, consisted of several different lobes. though the main difference was that it appeared to be a triangle in shape, as if it were a pyramid sitting within its skull. There was also a small, unknown gland situated near the base of the brain itself. We had initially deduced the brainstem was already accounted for, so what this other gland was, we had no idea. It was at this point in the procedure that Dave stated the gland was beating. I asked, how could that possibly be, since this creature was clearly dead? But upon inspection myself, I too noticed it did appear to be beating, very slowly. I placed my hand softly upon the gland and felt it pulse. I noticed immediately a silvery, metallic-looking bodily fluid of some kind on my glove that this gland appeared to be secreting. Not only did it appear to be still pumping this substance through the body somehow, it also secreted it into the cavernous spaces of the skull and down its spinal column. Using a syringe, I pierced the gland and was able to aspirate a significant amount of the fluid. It was a silvery liquid that looked similar to mercury but lacked the shine. It was a very dull silver in color. I placed it into a vial for further research. Was it its blood? I don't know. I don't believe it was, simply because the next day we found out what it did. What was that? We spent all day theorizing over our findings. We spent the night at the lab and didn't call our families. We weren't due back for a few days anyway. We woke up the next morning to a shocking finding on the cadaver. The incision I had made in its chest was in an advanced state of healing. We didn't adequate this substance to this healing until after we discussed how an incision so large as to open the entire front of the torso could possibly look this healed in a little over 18 hours. We deduced the mystery gland with the mysterious substance was the only thing still functioning on this cadaver, somehow despite its deceased status. We decided we needed to test this hypothesis. I could talk for days about our experiments, so I'm going to have to break it down to the most important parts. We decided to inject this substance into lab mice to see how they reacted. The first 3 mice were injected, appeared to die, but they didn't actually perish. Clinically, they appeared dead, meaning the fluid was incompatible to the point of causing death in the subject. But after declaring them dead, they were found to be active again after a short time, though they seemed almost rabid. They viciously attacked the other mouse in the pen and killed it immediately, and appeared to begin to cannibalize its corpse. I want to take this time to interrupt the transcript to say I have never heard anything this thought out, intricate, and scientific in my entire career. I am absolutely hooked at this time, and despite it being an appropriate time to take a break, I don't. We then attempted to terminate the rabid mice using an injectable toxin. We have euthanized many mice using this method, and this is the first time it did not have any effect on any of the 3 of them. I then doubled the dose and injected them again. They should have been dead in less than a minute, but they remained as active as before. Dave took over at this point. He took the tongs that we used to hold them in place and proceeded to pierce their skulls with a syringe. This method effectively resulted in their deaths. John then suggested we inject a few more mice, but keep them all separate. I agreed, and proceeded to inject 3 more mice with the fluid. It was at this time we decided to test our hypothesis that this substance was providing the cadaver a healing property, despite it being dead, by removing the gland. We extracted more of the silvery fluid, since we feared removal of the gland would result in loss of the fluid production itself. After the gland was removed, a large incision was made to test our hypothesis. After nearly 8 hours, the incision had not healed at all, thus proving our hypothesis. Whatever this fluid was, it had a tremendous healing effect on this ET's body. That must have been why there was no trauma on the body from the crash. It had been healed. We also theorized that this substance could not actually bring the ET back to life, should it perish, as it appeared to have drowned and died. I'm getting ahead of myself. Shortly after euthanizing the lab mice, we performed an autopsy on one of them. Though they had been dead only about 15 minutes, its internal organs told a different story. Atrophy and shrinkage of the internal organs indicated the mouse had been deceased for several hours. Knowing this could not possibly be, we examined its brain, where a large concentration of the silver fluid had accumulated. We had no explanation for this, and after lots of conjecture, we hypothesized that with the amount of this fluid located in the brain of this mouse, that it somehow retained its healing property, and despite the apparent toxicity of this substance, it somehow kept the mouse's brain active, though on a very primitive level, while it caused the rest of the body to waste away, as if it had expired. We felt this was an appropriate hypothesis, given the toxin we used had no effect on the mouse, and only after we pierced its brain did it finally expire. We then did an autopsy on the other 2 mice, which produced identical results. What happened with the other set of mice? This is kind of the beginning of the end. 2 of the mice proceeded exactly as the first 3 had. They appeared to die only when they did not, and became rabid, immediately attempting to attack our fingers when we pressed them up to the glass. The 3rd mouse, however, exhibited something else entirely. Long after the other 2 had gone rabid, this mouse appeared to be completely unaffected by the injection of this fluid. We knew we had to be very careful with this mouse and how we proceeded, as it was not exhibiting symptoms of toxicity from this fluid. We needed to ascertain whether or not this mouse's body had accepted the fluid and was now capable of regenerating from physical injury, or if it was simply carrying this fluid in its body. Carrying as in the medical sense with disease? Correct. This mouse could simply be immune to the toxicity or incompatibility and not be able to regenerate from injury. It just carries this fluid in its body. Unfortunately, John got ahead of himself. Seeing the mouse appeared to be perfectly fine, he picked it up. It bit him hard enough to pierce his glove on his left thumb. He dropped the mouse, and it scampered away. Gary and Dave immediately tore the place apart, looking for it, as did I, while John began scrubbing and decontamination. We were not able to find it. We had lost our only successful specimen. We advised John to go to the hospital immediately, but he declined. It was his fault we lost the mouse, and he was determined to continue searching for it. We should have insisted harder than we did that he go. We never found the mouse. We spent most of that day in conjecture and hypothesizing our findings. By the evening, we were still going over notes and making journal entries. At about 6:30 p.m., John had an uncontrollable coughing fit. He looked pale and diaphoretic, and we knew it was because of the mouse biting him. His thumb also looked disgusting. We were all biologists. We should have known to stop what we were doing and take him in right away. But we just couldn't peel ourselves away from what we were doing. Gary volunteered to take him to the local ER while Dave and I stayed behind. I never saw John again. While we were alone, Dave mentioned we needed to test the fluid on something other than a mouse. It was at this point I realized we had all gone too far. We should have just left the crash site alone, and certainly shouldn't have entered it. Dave was starting to become fanatical, bordering on unethical. He started to offer picking up a stray dog or cat, and when he mentioned a homeless person, it was at that point I knew we were all in serious trouble. I told him there was no way any of us could possibly partake in something so unethical. He reiterated the fact that somehow we needed a human test. Maybe it was just something with the mice. If a human host accepted this fluid, it could potentially be synthesized to create the most powerful healing agent known to man. Sickness and disease could be eradicated if it worked. I repeated to him, if it worked. We would be responsible for the death of a human being if it didn't. It would absolutely be murder. After a few minutes or so, I realized we did have a human test. John. I told Dave, just look at John. He's showing the same symptoms of decline the mice did. He then told me that can't be considered a true test. The mouse couldn't possibly have passed on the mystery fluid. through a small, simple bite. A full injection needed to occur. I began to realize with John's condition that this fluid appeared to be acting like a true disease. If it were able to be transferred via a bite, and then cause a rabid insanity in anyone who was incompatible, we could be looking at a major outbreak. I felt like I needed to call the hospital to warn them. Did you? I didn't get the chance. Gary came back at that point and said John appeared to look even worse after only 20 minutes in the car. I informed him what I had talked to Dave about, and he immediately concurred we needed to stop what we were doing. We went back to the lounge room we have. We rented out several other small offices, in addition to the area we used for our lab, and found Dave was missing. Fearing the worst, we immediately went back to the lab and found him with a tourniquet on his left arm. He was injecting the silver fluid into his arm. Gary asked him, "What the hell did you do?" And I had some choice questions myself. Knowing he had just signed his own death certificate, I knew he needed to involve the police at that point. I was not optimistic that his body was going to accept the fluid as the mouse's had. We discussed our options at that point. I reiterated my theory on how this fluid acted almost like a virus. All but one of the mice had succumbed to the incompatibility and eventually went insane. It was my theory that one of the two things occurred in the mouse that did not. Either for reasons unknown, the mouse accepted the fluid and was now a super mouse, or the mouse was simply acting as a carrier, meaning its body was unaffected by the fluid, and it was simply carrying it. Either case, it would still be capable of transmission via bite. Gary was a virologist, and he mentioned one other thing. Some viruses cause mutations of the host's genome. Nothing like you see in the movies where they turn into hulking monsters. But we had to consider two things. This wasn't actually a virus. It just appeared to act like one. And if this fluid did cause a mutation, there's no telling what that would mean. You shot him, so obviously he went bad. And I'm guessing you wouldn't have mentioned this mutation thing if that's not what happened. That's what happened. I guess we'll just skip to the main event. I could ramble on about theory and our scientific shenanigans all night. We didn't get much sleep that night on account of Dave. We drew some blood and did an analysis, and his blood was loaded with some sort of antigen. No doubt a product of the introduction of that fluid. It seemed like it was rewriting his genome somehow. By midnight, he was noticeably taller, as if his growth plate had been reopened by this antigen. This did not happen in the mice, so this was intriguing. But he was also declining visibly. He was pale, his color was leaving him, and he was diaphoretic. His decline was much slower than the mice and John as well. We'd virtually forgotten about John by that point. We had old hospital restraints in our equipment room. Dave said we should tie him down. He said he was starting to lose it. He looked like hell, like death. And he was huge. He was Arnold Schwarzenegger and getting bigger. His left hand was starting to contort and deform into this horrid claw. It was far too late to take him to the hospital at that point, so I knew we were screwed. We tied him down, claw and everything, though I didn't think that was going to matter. It didn't. And Gary and I fell asleep like idiots. I woke up and it was about 6:15 in the morning. I nudged Gary, telling him to wake the hell up, and we checked on Dave. He was dead. I instantly got a tremendous feeling of dread. How long had he been dead? Was he actually dead? He could reanimate any second. Did he? Yes. Gary was examining the body and he was way too close. I told him to back up, but it was too late. Dave reached over faster than I'd seen anyone ever move and had Gary by the throat. He snapped the restraints we had him in as if he was tied down with toilet paper. He then bit a huge chunk out of Gary's shoulder and then broke his neck. Pretty sure that was just on accident, though, on account of his new strength. I ran for it as he threw Gary away. Dave stood up and had to be about 6'5". He was 5'10" or so previously. I went to the lounge. We had a 45 hidden there, just in case there were nights we were there late. The docks can gather its shady characters at night. Anyway, I had the lights off and I was hiding behind the desk. I could hear Dave's heavy footsteps outside. His respirations were like a chainsaw. I knew he was looking for me. The door to the lounge opened, and I heard heavy footsteps enter the room. I'm shaking uncontrollably as I hear him stop. I ask myself, have his senses heightened? Can he hear me, or even smell me? I hear a few more steps, and suddenly the desk lifts up into the air like it weighs nothing, and Dave's claw is holding it up with just the one arm. His clothing was torn and tattered, and his skin looked like it was rotting off. I don't know if he was startled or what, but what I did next was straight out of a ridiculous kids movie. As he stood there holding the desk up, I simply crawled between his legs out behind him and ran for it. I heard the desk smash into the wall behind me, like he had thrown it. I made for the door outside, but then I realized something. I have to stop Dave here and now. If he gets out, how many people is he going to kill? And then infect? I went back towards our lab. I had 7 shots. I would get as close as I could and put all 7 in his head. Head trauma is what finally stopped the mice. I slowly entered the lab just in time to see Dave wind up and punch a hole through the wall, after which he stepped out into the sunlight and into the marina. I followed as fast as I could. The early birds were all out on the docks and the marina getting their boats ready, ripe for the picking. I hollered, "Dave," as loud as I could as I ran up to him. He spun around with a growl that would make a lion jealous. This caught everyone's attention, of course, and they all turned to see me run up to him and put 2 in his face. He stumbled and swayed before falling back. I then put 3 more in his head, and it pretty much exploded. The shrieks of bystanders filled the area as everyone scattered. Running on pure adrenaline and nearly insane myself, I ran back into the lab. Gary had been bit. He needed one in his head too. As I got back into the lab, I saw Gary standing up again. He turned fast. I put 2 in his head as well. No sooner did I drop the gun in pure shock that I heard rushing footsteps behind me, followed by, "Get on the ground now." And here we are. That's the end of the transcript. So, let me tell you why I think I believe him. I asked him about the crime scene and if anyone saw Dave as a creature, and he had no idea. He had no idea what became of the lab, and all their research either, nor did he know anything about John. He was very educated, but he also had street smarts. He told me at that point that any day now, once it came out what had happened, the government would be stepping in and he'd be black-bagged. He was right. A couple days later, I was approached at the station by men in suits, FBI for sure, and they told me my services were no longer required in this case, and I was to turn over all materials related to it. I turned over the tape, but I had already saved it elsewhere, so I wasn't too pissed about it. I asked the arresting officer and detectives assigned, and they told me they too had been reassigned, and that the case was being handled externally. I decided to do some investigating of my own. First thing I checked was their lab, in one of the warehouses at the docks. This was at least a week after the event, and I could still see men in hazmat suits entering and exiting the warehouse, which seemed to be completely closed off, not just the areas they rented. I needed binoculars, since you could barely go anywhere down there without being stopped and redirected by men who were most certainly mercenaries. Next thing I checked was the hospital. I have a couple doctor friends. I asked the ER doc, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. They shipped him up to the floor real quick. Luckily, the admitting doc on the floor was also a friend. He told me they put a gag order on him, so we met in person. No traceable electronic conversations of any kind. He told me that John died shortly after he was admitted. He told me he had pronounced him himself. He was stone cold dead. He said as soon as they bagged him up, John then sat up and started thrashing and snarling and growling. They called security, and then called the cops after a nurse aide got bit trying to open the bag. They were able to zip the bag back up without anyone else getting bit. A security guard supposedly lost it when he saw John's dead body going crazy and biting a fellow employee, so he hit him with a portable oxygen tank over the head. Apparently enough trauma to kill John. Again. A few days later, the aide turned in her resignation via email and was never heard from again. He also told me John's chart was later deleted entirely. He told me you can't just delete a patient's electronic mail record. Whoever did it would have to be way high up. As for John's body, someone from the coroner's office came to get the body, but my friend didn't recognize them. He knew all the pickup guys. They also drove in an unmarked van. City vehicles were all clearly marked. Lastly, I went to the campsite myself where they went. I used my GPS to find the lake they said they went to, and took the back road to where they launched their boats. It was completely blocked off, and not only were there angry no trespassing signs up, but there was even one saying intruders might be shot. I'm hoping it's been long enough that it's blown over, and nobody is bothering with me anymore, so I can tell this story. As for Michael, I never heard from him again either. I tried looking him up in the system, and his file with the local department had been deleted as well. Police records are another thing you can't just delete entirely. All 4 of their Facebooks have been deactivated, and Google searches only bring up people with similar names. It doesn't even bring up anything from the university. Michael was black-bagged for sure, as were the other 3 post-mortem. I don't know about you, but this has conspiracy written all over it. And the more I think about it, the more I actually think this all happened, exactly as Michael said. One other thing I can't help but think about was that mouse that got away. Is there a genetic super mouse somewhere down at the marina? Or did those government whack jobs find it? If they didn't, we all better hope he lays low. It seems like major outbreaks throughout history always start with rodent carriers.